All right, welcome everybody. We can go to the next slide. We'll have a brief announcement.
Thank you for joining. This Zoom call, including all audio and images of participants and presentation materials, may be recorded, saved, edited, distributed, used internally, posted on DOE's website, or otherwise made publicly available. If you continue to access this call and provide such audio or image content, you consent to such use by or on behalf of DOE and the government for government purposes and acknowledge that you will not inspect or approve or be compensated for such use. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Simone. So welcome to all of our members and to anyone joining us today. I'm Zach Pritchard. I'm a technology manager in DOE's Industrial Efficiency and Decarbonization Office and the designated federal officer for the Industrial Technology Innovation Advisory Committee. I am joined today also by Selena Harris, who is also a technology manager in IEO and who is the alternate designated federal officer for the committee. Before we dive into the meeting, I've got a couple of housekeeping and administrative items I'll mention. Today's open meeting of the Industrial Technology Innovation Advisory Committee is being held in compliance with the Federal Advisory Committee Act and other applicable statutes and regulations. For today's meeting, the chat has been disabled and the general audience is not able to unmute or to turn on their cameras. The procedure to offer oral comments was described in the Federal Register notice for this meeting. Since we didn't receive any requests to offer oral comments, the public comment period is going to be removed from our agenda for today. That said, the committee wants to hear from you and we welcome your comments. Written statements can be submitted to itiac@ee.doe.gov, and you can register to provide oral comments at future meetings as well when those meetings are announced. I also want to mention, if we go to the next slide, please, that DOE is continually seeking new member nominations to consider for future vacancies for the committee and to maintain balance and points of view. So if you or someone you know would be an excellent member of the Industrial Technology Innovation Advisory Committee, nominations can be submitted to that same email address, itiac@ee.doe.gov. It should include the nominee's name, resume, biography, and any letters of support. With that, I'm going to hand things off to our chair, Sharon Nolan. Thanks so much.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So I'm Sharon Nolan. I'm an Eastman Fellow and the Program Manager for our Global Natural Resource Management Program. I've worked with DOE for a long time, and it's my privilege to lead this committee. So I want to start just by thanking everyone. We had a very successful first meeting in March, and I appreciate those who stepped up to volunteer to be on subcommittees, to lead those subcommittees, and we're going to be hearing about those today. So thank you for the work that's happened between our March meeting and now. We are excited to welcome two new members today. The first one is Sunday Abraham, and I believe he has joined us. So Sunday, I'll give you a couple of minutes just for a brief introduction.
Okay, good day, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, my name is Sunday Abraham, and I am the Director R&D at SSAB America's facility, and I'm located in Muscatine, Iowa. So thank you for appointing me as a member of this committee.
Welcome. Our other new committee member is Sergio Espinosa, and I believe he is not able to join us today. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so I know you all received an email this morning from Zach telling us a little bit about Sergio's background. So we're looking forward to having him join the committee as well. And that does give us a full slate for the committee. So our committee membership is complete for the time being, and we're happy to have that accomplished. I think there's a next slide for the agenda. Yes, so it will be a pretty lengthy meeting today to be doing it remotely, but we're going to have report outs from the various subcommittees. And as I mentioned, they've been working for about 3 months. And so we're looking forward to hearing what they've accomplished between our first meeting and this meeting. and we will have opportunity for discussion at the end. We have a couple of breaks built in, and then we will be doing a little bit of planning for our next meeting, which is in October. Next slide. So we have developed a mural board, and you should have an email for those on the committee with a link to the mural board. It's pretty simple to use, but I believe if you have any questions, you could probably IM Caroline, and she would be able to help you with that. Or Selena is also able to help with that. So my suggestions for how we set up the mural board is to have 5 categories, and the first 4 are things that we will be talking about later in this meeting. So we're looking for gaps, things we may have omitted from any subcommittee that we need to cover, or from a particular subcommittee if they're missing something. If we notice overlaps between the subcommittees, we want to surface those and figure out how to resolve them. We don't want 2 groups working on the same thing. We want any questions or comments about the overall timeline. And then 4th, any general questions or comments. I think if you'll be populating the mural board as we're working through the different reports, I think that will help us in our final discussion. And then finally, we have a section for each of the 6 subcommittees. And so you're very welcome to add comments there. I did suggest some abbreviations, so it would just make it simpler. You wouldn't have to type the whole thing out. So you're welcome to use these abbreviations just to make it a little simpler for you to provide feedback. So hopefully that will be a good tool for us. We will be talking about the first 4 at the end of the afternoon, and then we'll be providing that feedback to the subcommittees that they can review at a later date. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Avi Schultz and see if he has any comments for us.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you, Zach, for kicking us off. Good afternoon, or good morning to folks on the East Coast. Thanks again for all of your engagement. We really appreciate all the work that folks have put in up till now on the subcommittees and going forward. I just wanted to take a minute here. I won't be long. I know, as Zach said, there's a packed agenda. I just wanted to take a minute to, again, express my thanks to everyone for the work you're doing here. This is, of course, as I've said before, and you all know, really critical, valuable work that we find extremely valuable and helpful here in DOE. So wanted to just continue to thank you for all of the time that you've put into this, and of course welcome our newest members, Sunday and Sergio, who I know wasn't able to join us, but thank you so much for agreeing to join this committee and help us out. You are joining a group of unbelievably talented and thoughtful and intelligent people who are really doing incredible work to help us in DOE chart the future of our strategy on industrial decarbonization. So as I said, I won't take any more than that. You've got a packed agenda, but I just wanted to continue to express my thanks and appreciation for all the works that the committee is doing. Thanks.
Thank you, Avi. And I think that's a good opportunity to just mention that this committee does work very closely with the Department of Energy, and I really see it as a partnership. So we appreciate the support we get from DOE as well. Thank you. All right, with that, we will move into our first subcommittee report out, and that is the Barriers Committee, and Kathy Choi leads that. So Kathy, I will turn it over to you. Just one last comment before you begin. You know, I did talk about the mural board, but that does not mean you cannot raise your hand if you have a question or a comment. But I just wanted to make the mural board available for everyone throughout the meeting. So Kathy, I'll turn it over to you.
Super. Thank you very much. Again, my name is Kathy Choi. Good morning to all. I will be presenting on behalf of ITIAC's Barriers Subcommittee. Our agenda for today is to introduce first my peer subcommittee members, inform what success would look like for our subcommittee, the Barrier Subcommittee, our proposed scope and how it applies within ITIAC, introduce identified barriers to date based on our progress to date, and we've met quite a few times virtually in order to pull this information together. I'll describe our project plan and deliverables, and end with some definitions, which is definitions around the barriers that we have identified to give you a flavor of what we're doing. Next slide, please. Our subcommittee members in the barriers area are Betsy Dutro, Sue Clark, Miguel Rogitsky, Sasha Stashwick, Neil Elliott, and Eric Massanet, along with myself presenting one of you. Next slide, please. So what does success look like for us within the barrier subcommittee? We would like to be able to execute by identifying and prioritizing barriers to meeting our DOE goals. We will identify entities that are in position to take action in order to respond and or overcome these barriers. We want to be able to identify facts, data, and associated analyses techniques to determine the extent and or severity of the barriers and their impacts on our goals. And then we will have recommendations on how to overcome these barriers, and we'll emphasize those barriers, again, that have the greatest impact on achieving our ITIAC goals. Next slide, please. In terms of our scope, our subcommittee's deliverable is specifically aligned to our survey and analyze barriers to adoption of emissions reductions technology within the ITIAC's purpose statement. Our scope has been further defined by barriers associated with the cost of energy, development processes in industry that go from R&D to production. We have outstanding technology gaps, and we also have barriers associated with infrastructure, financing, and market adoption. And then finally, we have a barrier associated with workforce that supports all of the above. Next slide, please. We've parsed these different associated barriers into what we call 7 sub-barriers or categories. So I'm going to refer to them as categories now. Categories are covered as identified to date over 7 areas. Category 1, access and costs associated with low cost clean energy to power. And this can include low carbon fuels, feedstocks thereof, and examples of this would be green hydrogen, biomass, and renewables. Electricity costs, and it's as a barrier to adoption, and this also includes the entire energy value chain. The process from R&D to pilot, to technology demonstration, onto final deployment. Gaps in technology, particularly where additional R&D is needed. Infrastructure needs and associated permit requirements in areas where policy support would be beneficial. And then there are barriers with financing of new technology offtake and widespread market demand for scaled, sustained technology adoption. These can be driven not only by the private sector, but also through policy. And then finally, as our 7th category, trained workforce to implement and support new technology through its life cycle. So these are the 7 areas that the subcommittee has been working on, and you can see the leads or the owners that have raised their hand to volunteer and assign themselves to each of these categories. Next slide, please. So our project plan and deliverables, we've matched our deliverables and the dates for their completion. They're pegged to ITIAC review milestones. And within the plan, you can see it's kind of an eye chart here. It's for your information. You'll see on the right-hand side summary tasks to really kind of summarize in chunks what we need to accomplish. On the project plan itself, though, green indicates completed tasks, and yet yellow are those that are either in process or need to be addressed in the future. So within those summaries on the right-hand side, I'll elucidate them here. In process through August, our barrier subcommittee will continue to define the barriers and refine them. Pegged to our face-to-face meeting, our face-to-face ITIAC meeting by October, we will have these barrier categories further refined, defined with actors and influencers identified. We will also have brainstormed analysis tools and techniques to determine the extent and impact of these barriers. Pegged to our 12-month report out, by March 2025, we'll have our recommendations to overcome the barriers for each of these categories, and we'll also implement those tools and techniques for analysis that prioritize the barriers. And then finally, pegged to the full committee report out by the ITIC by September 2025, we'll have incorporated everything into the report. And most importantly, these prioritized barriers and the recommendations with their impacts to be fully incorporated. Next slide, please. So progress to date. Our subcommittee started drafting definitions for many of the categories. There are some categories still under construction. So what you'll see in the subsequent slides are those that have been drafted, and I will highlight those as we move forward in the presentation. Access to low-cost clean energy to power is currently under construction, so I'll move on to the second category, which is background and definition associated with electricity costs as a barrier to adoption. So what we have defined is that industrial electrification offers impactful and cross-cutting strategies to reduce industrial emissions. Now, new electricity generation, there's low cost associated with that when there's a renewable energy, but there are barriers associated and challenges for the industry. And the industrial electrification can be done as pathways through fuel switching to electricity and managing those electrical loads when surplus renewable energy is available or electricity is available. Major barriers, however, for the industry are clean electricity's reliability and the costs associated with not only the reliability, but also other operating costs to the industry. Moving on to the third barrier, pilot to demonstration to deployment, and this also includes supply chain. Changes in technology and their integration into supply chains require approaches that understand how the technology will function when integrated. So as background, historically, this has been done through pilots that are scaled to production. This approach can be, and historically has been, capital intensive and time consuming. So in order for the US to keep up with global changes and challenges, it'll be important for us to be able to streamline this process. So potential enablers to this barrier are strategies that use process virtualization to assess and refine the integration of new technologies into plants and value chains. This approach can dramatically speed the process, but requires the development of knowledge to build and validate models that are required to accomplish these goals. Now, how do we build this capacity? We build by changing how we do academic training, as well as creation of a new workforce. Next slide. Thank you. Technology gaps are also in progress, so I will move on to infrastructure, permitting, and policy support. As a barrier, industry's willingness and ability to implement new decarbonization technologies is impacted by infrastructure, permitting, and policy support. Infrastructure is defined as a system that supports the installation and use of new technology. Some examples of this would be like a supporting electrical system that supplies adequate power for new electrical equipment that potentially replaces fossil fuel-based systems. Permitting. Permitting is a set of legal requirements that enable new technologies to be installed. These can be seen as a system of international, federal, state, and local regulatory authorities and the legal reviews thereof, as well as permits required for installing new systems. These can include both voluntary and mandatory codes and standards. Policy support. The team refers policy support to be a set of legal, financial, and regulatory plans that are designed to reduce risk for industry uptake of new technologies. Items that fall under policy support are tax incentives or availability of financial enhancements that support adoption of a specific technology. Next slide, please. So our sixth barrier that was identified, financing barrier and market demand. We have a definition for financing. We are still working on market demand. So our definition for financing barriers are obstacles that businesses encounter that challenge their ability to access, manage, and grow their financial resources. Potential causes include challenges and positioning with credit, investment, incentives, and concerns with regulations and economic outlook long term. Then our last identified barrier is workforce, and our definition for that, an impact of that is the availability of adequate trained workforce represents a major barrier to both retrofit existing facilities and investment in new manufacturing. Now, this workforce can be broken down into several general categories, spanning from researchers, designers, operators, IT folks, as well as overall maintenance and support. So that is the last, our last barrier where we progressed to date. And it concludes my barrier subcommittee update for today.
Thank you, Kathy. So we have time for some questions now or comments. So I invite you to raise your hand if you'd like to have a question or comment. Okay, well, oh, there's Jeff. Okay, go ahead, Jeff.
Hi. So I liked the presentation. Thank you, Kathy. One thing I found particularly interesting was on barrier 3, where you mentioned it's expensive and time consuming to scale up all of these pilots to demonstrations to deployment. And you suggest, well, maybe we can use computer modeling to, replace or streamline some of that. I think that's an innovative idea. I wonder if you have thoughts about whether there are limits to how accurate it could be. Like if you actually are assembling something with wrenches and bolts and trying to get it to work, if there might be practicalities you run into that wouldn't have been evident from a computer simulation of the system.
I will provide my input, and others within the committee, please feel free to jump in. In general, going through the development process to production and then overall maintenance, I don't think the expectation would be 100% replacement of what I would call experimental processes and validation processes to be completely taken over by more simulation, modeling, predictive methodologies. But every incremental improvement helps. So the challenge here when you move to a new technology and a very transformational technology is that there's not much history to build off of. And the industry calls that sort of, you build off the family from the previous, you know what happened in the previous family, and you apply that to the incremental new technologies that get introduced. The first step is really understanding each of the technologies so you can apply those to existing processes that can then transform into new development, and most importantly, from a cost standpoint, validation processes that really address risk, reliability, and ongoing maintenance for the new product. I see Neil has his hand up. I will turn it over to Neil.
Thanks, Kathy. Yeah, Jeff, I mean, you raise a very good question, and I think we want to start by constraining this to, this is basically, we have a functioning physical pilot. So we have a technology that's validated that actually works. And the question is, how do we go from that pilot to a production scale demo to actual full-scale market deployment? And one of the problems that we frequently get into is, as we introduce these new technologies, if we do the traditional pilot hardware demonstrations, we have the scaling problem. You can't scale you do a pilot, you basically scale it up, it may or may not work. And one of the things we see with the emergence of virtual twins is this gives us the ability to take a proven technology, which we do have a data set for, and that's key, is you do have to have actual physical data. And then you use the virtual twin to essentially run scenarios on it. Good example of this is a program that DOE is supporting at Purdue Northwest and University of Minnesota on optimization of the DRI, direct reduction iron production, trying to deal with high slag content iron ore. And they're having a great deal of success doing this virtually and are able to go through multiple cycles, whereas actually doing this hardware-wise would be very time-consuming and financially limiting. So just an example, but this does not eliminate the need for physical building stuff, but at least, as Kathy sort of said, we have a good idea that what we're going to build is going to work.
Okay, Joe?
Yes, Joe Powell from University of Houston. Not all processes have to be demonstrated. So depending upon the technology selection, industry knows how to change chemistry and catalyst and some of the technologies and go directly to large scale without having to do demonstration units. And so I think one of the options is the ability to understand the scaling risk of different types of technology platforms according to what the technology selections are within those platforms, and then factor that into the development timeline. I know I'm on a CO2 utilization committee, and essentially getting back to synthesis gas really is the only unproven step that needs to be demonstrated. But once you're there, you have a tremendous set of technologies that are known how to do and how to build today that take you through the rest of the platform in terms of utilization. So I think understanding scalability as a function of technology selection choice is really important. And then not think in terms that everything has to be redemonstrated in order to decarbonize.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Speaking from industry, I guess one other comment I would add to that is, I think there's a reluctance, there's something that has to be overcome for industry to adopt new technology. And so getting them comfortable with that approach is also an issue. So something to think about. Kathy, I did have one question for you on electricity cost. So number 2, your last comment about renewable energy is already the cheapest form of new electricity generation. I just wanted to ask more about what that meant, because my experience has been when we do want to purchase renewable energy, we have to pay a premium for it. So can you explain?
I'll probably ask Sasha and or Eric to jump in here, but it was worded, I think, very specifically. Generating versus transmission is a little bit different here.
Okay.
So the generation of new electricity doesn't mean it's already gone through the entire value chain to the end user.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Are there other questions for Kathy
Go
or?
ahead.
Yeah,
So
I had
sorry.
Go ahead.
I had a
Yeah.
question.
Oh, sorry.
Kathy, great talk. Appreciate it. Just a very maybe a trivial question, but for general public to see a committee named Barrier Committee, means they were trying to create a barrier, and so I mean, just maybe optics issue or anything else. So maybe mitigation of barrier or something, so that we convey that we're not creating barriers. Anyhow, just a thought.
That's excellent input. We could call her. I think that's a good further internal discussion we can have. Thank you.
All right, we still have a few more minutes. Does anyone on the committee want to add, or the subcommittee want to add additional comments to what Kathy shared? Or questions from anyone? All right, thank you. I appreciate the update from this committee. It looks like they've gotten a good start here. So the next subcommittee that we'll be referring to is the Industrial Sectors Subcommittee. Subodh leads this committee, and Subodh will let you go ahead and share your information.
Okay, thank you. The committee is made of this following 6 members, myself as the lead, Betsy Dutro, and I see her on the line, and Eric Messnet, I have not seen him. Joe Powell, obviously, just spoke, and he's here. So is Sridhar Sitaraman, he's here as well, and so Jolene. So out of 6, we have 5 people, so we are well represented. The next slide, please. We had our team meeting on July 8th. That several of the members joined us, and the minutes were published thanks to work by Zach and his associates at maybe Energetics. And so we reviewed the minutes, and then I had conversation with several of the team members, and in preparation for this presentation today, that was our task. I'm sorry, I only have 4 slides to share, so don't be disappointed with the brevity of my communication. Next one, please. Okay, so this is a busy slide, but probably the most important slide is that our task was subcommittee to determine which industries to address. And then I listed the top 6 or 7 industry based upon greenhouse gases in million metric tons, chemical manufacturing, petroleum refining, iron and steel, food and beverages, cement, and then all inclusive but not defined, all manufacturing, and again, not defined but important non-manufacturing industries. So the first conversation that I wanted to have with the committee is that how do we choose, how do we allocate resources to which industries to study? And then we had a discussion on each one of them. And I'm listing here the conversations that we had at the group meeting, as well as numerous emails and conversation I had with Jim Powell and also with Sridhar. So this reflects the composite input. So the black letter, chemical manufacturing, is just a question, and the answers or conversations we have is in the green. So it was general consensus that it must be covered and expanded to include chemical processing. That came from Joe Powell. The second was that we have petroleum refining 70%. The importance of us studying it was questioned. Somebody made a comment that are we going to influence the oil refiners, all them big names to change the refining practices. So that was a question that we need to resolve. And then the third category was iron and steel. And then the comment that was made by one of our expert members, there's already a big focus by DOE, and US sector, iron and steel, is already more efficient, more electrified than the rest of the world. So we need to have some conversation about iron and steel. And then there was conversation, should we include other non-ferrous materials such as markets for copper, aluminum, silicon, and critical materials, because their importance may grow, the importance and demand and national security needs may grow as we implement the energy transitions, copper for electrification, aluminum for lightweight, and silicon, a critical material for national security and the need for us to have a domestic production. Then also it was mentioned that glass should have a strong support. Aluminum was also mentioned, that is of interest to Congress. Pulp and paper, strong support. I brought up the point of recycled materials because, most of the fabrication in US is mostly recycled materials, be metals and non-metals, and there's a lot of effort by one of the government run US manufacturing facilities, remade, and they are entirely devoted on recycled materials. But the question was that since recycling consumes much less energy than the primary or virgin material, is already decarbonized, which I can see the logic. Then how about rare earths and like especially neodymium and praseodymium or permanent magnets, and critical materials, especially the battery materials like nickel and cobalt. So that is brought a lot of conversation and discussion. So we need to discuss more and see. We have resource, and then other point was brought up by I think by Sharon, that if you don't have the resources, it could be brought up. There's a ways to bring resources, the DOE resources or external resources, with or without adding them as a member. We saw 2 new members, but other could be also brought in. So my personal feeling is that, we're going to spend time devoting less work on things that are important, and importance, at least me coming from industrial sector, importance in greenhouse gases, obviously, but also important in emerging field like 5 years or 10, as we go to renewable energy route, we need the critical materials and rare earths and all that. So should that decision be based exclusively on greenhouse gases, or we should also consider other factors like national security or industrial job base and things like that? So that still needs to be discussed. Food and beverage must be covered. Very strong sentiment for that. Cement, obviously there's a lot of activity in cement. One of our members brought up the point that the scope 1 impact of cement manufacturing in the US is small because we're importing most of the clinker. So that's something needs to be discussed. And then 48% or nearly half of the greenhouse gases are from all other manufacturing, non-manufacturing industries. So how do we select? Do we put rare earths or critical materials or battery materials in all manufacturing, or non-manufacturing, which has become pretty important lately, the data centers, mining, urban agriculture, and construction. So I think before, in my mind, and I think everybody at least people who participate express the opinion that, before we delve into resource and work and roadmap and detailed work, we should have some discussion as to which are the industries that we should focus on, what is the criteria, and how we go about adding the items that are not on this list, or maybe de-emphasizing the items that are on the list, like petroleum refining, and adding such like critical materials or glass or aluminum or paper and pulp. So next slide, please. So here are the 4 action items. So I requested that DOE has obviously done great work in the past, and I've been part of many of them. We have roadmaps and reports on industrial sectors. So we want to benefit from that. And Zach kindly volunteered to prepare that list and send it to us. And the other point was brought up by one of our members, is that let's check the funding figures by sectors to determine if funding information beyond DOE is available. I think that would be a pretty important thing to know, if the money or funding is flowing in some sectors in DOE or outside DOE. That reflects what is being perceived as important by the industrial sector and even public at large. And I have done that. Number 3, my job was to take the action item that came from our team meeting on July 8th, and criteria for selecting and should be addressed. Should we address just greenhouse gases? Should we address economic impact? Should we address what's now or what could be future? New subcommittee could be formed. I was informed, and then additional resources can be brought. So that number 3 is basically summarizing what we need to discuss and what criteria we have and how do we go about doing that. And then the suggestion was made that we should have a resource inventory where we can share the documents. I think some of them can be already done through the existing channels of communication. So those are my 4 slides. And you know, I see 3 of our members are here, maybe 4 of them. I see Joe, and I see Sitaraman, and I also see Jolene. I saw her name there somewhere. So she's here, and only party missing so far is Betsy's here. Eric is not here, and then yeah. So we got 5 members here, and other members beyond this committee. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions, I'm all ears.
Yeah, before we get to questions, I just wanted to clarify, I guess, what I had participated in the last meeting, and that is my intent to be able to drop into some of the subcommittee meetings just to gain a better understanding of what's going on. And so I had reminded the subcommittee, if you remember back to our meeting in March, there were a number of people who wanted to participate in this, but we're limited on the number in the subcommittee. And so, there's certainly a possibility once they identify the sectors that there will be additional people that get involved in certain industrial sections of this. And then the other thing was Zach and I had a conversation. There is some possibility to bring in people who are not committee members, but could participate at the subcommittee level. But before you do that, I just want to encourage you, or really ask you, if you have a need to bring in additional people, please discuss that with Zach to make sure that, everything is in the guidelines and that we're not straying out of what we should be doing. So don't add subcommittee members without talking to Zach.
Oh, yeah. That's not my intention, obviously. So I will. Yeah. And Sharon, you shared those comments before, so I agree with that. And so my biggest challenge for me is that out of 6 or 8 or 12 sectors, which one should we focus and what criteria should be used for focusing? I think if we can resolve that, then before we know which road to go, let's find out, how we select the roads. But your comments are well understood and taken and will be implemented by this.
Oh, yeah. I knew you all knew, but I felt like the full committee should hear that. So
Yes, yeah,
Subodh,
thank
thank you. I'm glad you remembered I'd said that.
No, you
Okay.
did that. I remember very distinctly. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Joe has his hand up.
Yeah, great starting document, Subodh. Apologize
you.
for missing the first meeting. We were knocked back to the Stone Age with Hurricane Beryl last week. And
Are you based in Houston or somewhere? Where
I'm
you're
based in Houston. And
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
the good news is we have some power back, but amazingly, 10 days later, still more than 60,000 without power. But yeah, I think in terms of the chemicals, you covered that importance of the greenhouse gas inventory. I think you know, when you look at the oil majors in refining, a lot of that work and innovation comes out of the U.S. I think there's a reason to cover that, so that the nationally owned oil companies in the rest of the world, you know, have that opportunity to have that technology disseminated and help decarbonize. So that activity is already going on in industry, and I think it'll be relatively easy to pull that together and document that 17%. And then similarly for steel, yeah, the U.S. is working only off of scrap, but you've got to have iron ore globally in that supply chain. And I think, again, looking at where can we lead in technology dissemination, if you look to the future with industry relocating according to where the renewable resources are, U.S. has a lot of that. We could be getting more back into the iron ore refining business in the future, and we have a whole lot of hydrogen technology to come into play there. I know a number of the majors are already investing in the U.S. for demonstration projects. So I think there's a reason to be covering the decarbonization on the steel side. And then similarly on the cement, you know, from the CO2 utilization side of that to the integration of renewables into decarbonization, not just for the US, but also in terms of the global decarbonization picture. So I look at it as, you know, the US has always led in technology in these sectors. And we have the project and development experience to continue doing that. And I think our report needs to think a bit globally in terms of that technology impact of these decarbonization opportunities.
Just a clarification question. Is somebody taking minutes of this? I'm just intent on listening. I'm not taking any, because I'll benefit from the minutes so that I can, you know, I can formulate that for our team members. So hopefully somebody's taking minutes.
Yes.
Yes, Subodh, we'll have minutes and
Okay, thank you. Thank
even
you,
a
Zach.
transcript. So
I appreciate it. Thank you. Go
Yeah.
ahead, please.
It does take a little while to get the minutes out.
No,
so I
that's
would
fine.
encourage, you know, if anybody wants to make sure Subodh sees their comment, to put it in Mural. Yeah, and Simone just pointed out there will also be a recording, so anyone can go back and listen to it as well as a transcription. Okay,
Hey, Eric, welcome. Eric is here.
Yeah, I see several hands up. I think I saw Jeff's first, so Jeff, we'll start with you.
My comment is really brief. In your last slide, Subodh, on number 2, you were asking about access to information about DOE funding by sector, et cetera. Just to avoid duplication of work, I wanted to point out that the DOE current work and GAPS committee has already begun, has made great progress on assessing exactly this. And there's a file shared with today's meeting in the box that has our breakdowns of an overview of DOE's offices, programs, and funding levels that pertain to the industrial sector. I just sent in the chat a link to the shared box folder that all of IDIAC has access to, where the DOE staff have put that document. And I put the name so that you see it's the one called DOE Industrial Programs Overview, VO3. So just encourage you to take a look at that before you do a lot of work on number 2 to make sure we're not duplicating each other's work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good point. And that also will be in the minutes, right? Your link that you're sharing will be in the minutes that somebody will be taking.
Caroline Will you be including links from the
Well-
chat in the minutes, or Zach?
Yeah, we'll make sure that that is
Okay,
shared
thank
with the
you.
committee members.
Yeah, so we can be intent on listening, and so that's a very good point, especially nobody wants to duplicate waste of effort. So yeah, excellent point. Thank you.
Okay, Neil?
Let me get off of mute and close all the various windows. A couple of comments, and I did enter one vis-a-vis the mirror board on the data center question. I think this is a question we need to punt up to DOE leadership and probably Avi and above level. DOE needs to address this, but I think it's they're fundamentally different than what we're dealing with manufacturing. So there's that sort of comment there. The other one I wanted to note, and this is just a sort of an observation vis-a-vis the discussion on primary, secondary, and steel industry. This is something that's been how shall I phrase this, has been kind of a challenge for many of us working in this sector, and a new proposal that's emerged in the last couple of months or weeks at least is to segment steel by production of iron. Going to Joe's question, we're looking at bringing iron production from iron ore as a major area that is looking for technology innovation, and then separate that from electric arc furnaces, because the iron produced out of either electrolytic or direct reduction iron production facility is going to go into an electric arc furnace. And so in that case, somebody like a EAF company like Nucor may end up not looking different than the EAF business of somebody like a Cleveland-Cliffs or US Steel. And I would certainly say Dr. Abraham probably should weigh in on this, since he actually lives this. So
Just a comment on Neil's observation. The US leads the world in recycled technology in every sector. I mean, talk about metals or fiber and all that. And to the point that the user or the ultimate customer is rethinking or reestablishing the specification, so will allow us to use the recycled materials. So while I'm all for making primary metals, primary materials in the US, let's not forget that we're trying to go back to primary, but the whole world is trying to catch up with us, come back to secondary. So it's okay to, it's just a comment that there's great amount of movement in the industry to be able to use recycled materials, to the point that the largest scrap organization renamed themselves from scrap to REMA, Recycled Material Association. So the trend that we are using most recycle is very favorable, and the whole world is trying to catch up with us. So just a comment on what Neil said.
if I can just respond back real quick, and I would just note the challenge with steel right now is that we don't have enough scrap to meet global market needs as they expand. So steel is a little different than, say, aluminum or chemicals or many other industries. So, but
Good point.
nuance.
Okay, I'm just going to call on Sunday because
Yeah,
I think maybe you're responding to this,
yeah.
and then we'll get to
yeah.
the others.
Yeah, I would like to thank you, Neil, for asking for my comments. I just want to echo what Neil has said, that, as everybody raised to convert to a modern way of steel making, which is via electric arc furnace, will be squeezed with respect to the quality of the scrap and availability of scrap for our industry. But not only the availability, but the quality also will deteriorate because we have residual elements like copper, tin, antimony, arsenic that is very detrimental for certain applications like the automotive industry or for some home solutions as well. And then the other, issue is that even though if we go into other processes like the DRI production methodology to produce iron unit to supplement, scrap unavailability, then we have the issue with, can we melt significant amount of these iron units in the electrical furnace without, affecting key melting parameters like the power on time, kWh per ton. In essence, how economic would that process be? So those are the two main challenges that we face in the future, and we have to address head on.
Thank you. Abigail?
Hi, everyone. Actually, can I request to go a bit later? I'm just busy with childcare issue at the moment.
Okay, Eric.
Hopefully in a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Presentation.
His voice is coming choppy. Your voice is coming choppy, Eric.
Okay.
Much better. Much better.
Oh, is this better? Okay. Apologies for the technical difficulties. I was saying thanks for the presentation. And I know I'm a member of the subcommittee. I wasn't able to attend the last meeting because my family and I were on a brief vacation. I did want to flag when it comes to the all other manufacturing, a third of all current energy use, we might consider unpacking next generation industries or reshoring industries, like through the CHIPS Act, semiconductor manufacturing, battery manufacturing, because even though these are largely based on electricity, they do have important implications for energy use and CO2 emissions, and they'll be growing in the future. The other aspect I want to mention is, following on your comments about the recycling industry, Subodh, is we might want to consider addressing the need or the importance of growing recycling industries for clean energy technologies, battery recycling, solar PV recycling, reclamation of critical materials. These are all subsector issues that I think are going to grow in importance with the directions of future U.S. manufacturing and clean energy use.
Great points, Eric. Both of them right on the, right on the point that recycling not only relates itself to the, aluminum, iron, steel, or glass. It also relates to the renewable energy, the blades and panels, and so I think you already expanded and clarified the definition, which I appreciated. And also I appreciate your your comment that maybe all manufacturing should include rare earths and critical materials because that's what is being reflected by Congress and DOE. And on the funding, look at the VC funding, majority of that is going in rare earths and critical materials. So those are excellent comment and gives us a gives a direction where to go. Thank you.
All right. Is there any other member of the subcommittee that wants to have any comments or any last questions from anyone?
Abigail said she had a question after a couple of minutes. So
yeah, she put her hand down. I think she's
okay.
I
can
her.
Attempt to
go ahead,
give
Abigail. Sorry.
quickly.
Yeah.
Thanks. First, I wanted to just second Joe's comments that he had made initially on thinking more globally in terms of some of the criteria and GHG, that not just basing our thinking on kind of the US picture, but globally as well, because I think that we all see the influence of things going on in the US to hopefully make a big impact globally as well. And some of these, if you look at the global picture, then are, you know, very significant GHG impacts, as well as when we think about continuing global development and infrastructure. So just thinking about things like steel and cement and literally, you know, the building materials that countries are going to continue to use to develop and things like that. So totally second that. A small comment on the cement too, just thinking about this global question on not being sure that the importing comment is correct. And that I think a lot of our clinker and cement is still generated domestically. And while there are some imports going on, it's not the majority. And that it's typically, you know, the case for other countries as well, just because of the, you know, weight of the material, that it's often generated domestically. Then maybe a more substantive question comment is maybe a clarification of what the subcommittee's goals should be in terms of identifying the industries, as whether it's or maybe it's both of these things, but kind of one case being what are the important sectors to be thinking about just broadly for industrial decarbonization, just like what is important and like whatever the criteria are determined, you know, listing those subsectors, but then where maybe more of the committee's goals or like what's going to be in the report is on top of that, maybe more of specifically any sectors or subsectors that the committee should be focusing the report on, because those are where the gaps are in, say, like DOE's, you know, current programming and funding, which it sounds like maybe the, you know, questions 1 and 2 on the next slide and what Jeff has mentioned, you know, is already taking place in the subcommittee he's leading is part of that. So I also, I think, recall, though I don't have the materials in front of me, that there are specific sectors that were listed in the legislation for the committee, and whether we need to directly respond to those listed and whether that's part of this conversation as well. But maybe that's kind of my last kind of just broader clarifying question comment.
Thank you, Abigail. And I think along those lines, one other thing to remember is at our first meeting, I think it was Avi told us that, you know, this is a long-term committee, even though our terms were initially just 2 years. And so it is an option to, you know, list certain things that to say, we did not study this, but we think, you know, the next report should include these things. So that would be another way to handle some of the things we don't get to this time. Anna?
Thanks, Sharon. And hi, everyone. Well, Sharon, you just answered one of my questions there about kind of punting, either partially or wholly punting any sectors. The other, I guess, maybe comment recommendation that I was going to make is I'm really glad to hear that this committee is looking at where funding has been going over the last couple of years. And I'm not on either of these subcommittees, but it seems very important to me that this subcommittee works with the recommendation subcommittee, because there may be, I'm sure, just in all of our experience around the funding programs, that there are some significant gaps, and I would want to make sure that if there are recommendations we want to make to Congress for more funding for certain sectors where there are huge gaps, that actually gets included in the recommendation section. So just wanted to put a plug for that in now.
Thank you. Okay, Subodh, let me just give you a minute or two. Do you have any questions for anyone, any clarifying questions? Or if not, we can move on to our next subcommittee.
No, I'm fine. I'll wait for the minutes to come, and then I'll comb through the words and, you know, comments and try to formulate something which I can share with the committee members. Thank you for asking.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, with that, we'll move to the Cross-Cutting Technologies Subcommittee. And Eric, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sharon. So I am going to share my screen and I believe run my slides from my desktop. So bear with me for just a moment, everyone. Okay, here we go. So my name is Eric Massanet. I'm a professor at UC, University of California, Santa Barbara, and it's my pleasure to represent the Cross-Cutting Opportunities Subcommittee. And our agenda for this presentation is similar to previous presentations. I'd like to introduce the subcommittee members, give you a sense of what we think success looks like for our subcommittee in the final report, discuss some of our ideas for the cross-cutting opportunities we'd like to highlight, and discuss our next steps and our project plan. And before I proceed, I think I should just give you a definition of what we're considering as cross-cutting opportunities. DOE has used this term for decades, and essentially a cross-cutting opportunity is a technology area or a type of operational practice that really cuts across most or all industrial subsectors. Think, for example, like a steam system. It's used in the chemical industry, the refining industry, the food and beverage industry. So that's an example of a cross-cutting technology that, if improved, could benefit many industrial sectors all at once. Our subcommittee is comprised of the following 6 people: Neil Elliott, Thomas Haynes, Sharon Nolan, Jeff Rissman, Sridhar Sitharaman, and Jolene Scheil, including myself. We spent a lot of time thinking about what success could look like for this particular chapter section of the final report. And I'd like to share with you some preliminary thoughts, and we'd love to get some feedback. As I mentioned, cross-cutting technologies are those that span across or can address common challenges among most or all U.S. industrial sectors. And we really want to provide clear guidance to Congress about what DOE can do in cross-cutting areas, and hopefully provide some priorities on where the most beneficial actions can be taken. Because cross-cutting technologies have an enormous leverage effect by promoting or accelerating a given type of technology. We can improve energy productivity across many industrial sectors. So clarity of guidance is a key goal of ours. We also want to make sure that we identify barriers and include linkages to the important work going on in the Overcoming Barriers Subcommittee. Maybe we'll change their name, because many cross-cutting opportunities. We want to make sure that we have both sort of overarching recommendations for cross-cutting technologies as a technology class, but also specific recommendations for individual cross-cutting technologies. So there is a lot of clear guidance, both in a general sense, but also for specific technologies. And we want to make sure that we're using as much quantitative evidence as we can in our section, including metrics such as energy savings, cost savings, job creation, and so forth, so that these recommendations or conclusions will be based on strong evidence, because that's the best basis for making robust decisions moving forward. And for the use of quantitative information, we're hoping to identify and utilize clear metrics that will help us both compare different opportunities, discuss them, understand that not only provide evidence and KPIs, but also could be potentially useful for measurement and verification of pilot projects or case studies and so forth. We are also cognizant that there are many emerging cross-cutting technologies, and that those technologies will not only need deployment assistance, but in many cases more R&D assistance to bring them to a state of market readiness. So we'll be including emerging opportunities as part of our scope. A cross-cutting issue that we are already confronting is the sometimes lack of data, both the types of data and their regularity or their confidence when it comes to the industrial sector. So we're going to also be trying to raise the visibility of the need for just better data on the industrial sector, including installed technologies, energy data, emissions data, cost data that will be needed for promoting cross-cutting opportunities moving forward. And many of the cross-cutting opportunities are also opportunities for workforce training and improving the education of future industrial engineers and manufacturing sector experts. So we're also going to be striving to have linkages to education and workforce training messaging that's in the report itself. So that's quite a lot, but we recognize that cross-cutting opportunities can have a large leverage effect. So we want to make sure that we are thinking about all the different ways that our chapter could provide valuable information. So what I'd like to do now is move into some of the areas we've identified as important for inclusion when it comes to cross-cutting opportunities. And we recognize that there may be some overlap with other subcommittees. One of the big goals of today's meeting is for all of the subcommittees to share their current scopes, and for all of us after this meeting, I think, to refine and consolidate and make sure that we address any potential overlap. So this is a somewhat of a long list, but I'd like to just step you through it. The current list is also the result of several meetings and a lot of offline communication among the subcommittee. So first cross-cutting opportunity we feel is important to discuss is carbon capture, utilization, and storage. So this includes, not only sequestering captured carbon, but also thinking about beneficial uses of carbon, to meet national economic and manufacturing goals. So that's clearly a big one that is included in a lot of decarbonization plans for the U.S. industry. The second cross-cutting opportunity area is circular economy / demand reduction. I should note that I'm introducing these topics in alphabetical order, so there's no implied prioritization in the numbers that I'm presenting. These are just numbered alphabetically. Second category is circular economy and thinking about ways of reducing demand for materials and products in the first place through better design, through remanufacturing, through materials efficiency, through recycling. So that will be a big topic area, we think. Dynamic load management. This refers to not only demand response, but also the ways that industrial plants can manage their loads, either through load shifting or timing of loads, the use of energy storage on site to support the evolution of the grid towards more renewable energy, which is critical for meeting national climate goals. And many industries, especially those that will continue to electrify, could see this as an opportunity for not only improving efficiency and electrifying, but also supporting the grid as part of the grid side transition. Fourth topic, digitalization. It's a big one. It cuts across pretty much every industrial sector when it comes to the use of artificial intelligence, machine learning, smart manufacturing techniques, traditional process controls, even the use of digital twin technology for process simulation and simulating new process changes, new material designs, and so forth. For now, we have additive manufacturing under digitalization, but it could also be considered an electrification type process improvements. Electrification comes next. Big opportunity space for all industrial subsectors, and there'll be some common challenges associated with electrification and a lot of common opportunities as well that we hope to discuss. We also are recognizing that the need for on-site energy storage might be quite important when it comes to electrifying. Not only storage of electrical energy in the form of batteries, but also thermal storage, storage of heat for electrifying process heat. Sixth area is energy efficiency. It's still a critically important area for reducing demand for energy, optimizing industrial processes. So in this category, we would probably include some of the traditional Department of Energy cross-cutting systems, such as motors, pumps, compressed air systems, steam systems, and the like, process heating systems. But we're also thinking about heat integration, which is a critical energy efficiency strategy, but is also one that can be untapped in many industrial sectors or could still be improved. And this also includes inter-plant exchanges of mass and heat through the ideas of industrial clusters, use of district heating, and so forth. could be a big opportunity, especially as we retrofit and expand manufacturing capabilities. Infrastructure is going to be a critical potential, I don't want to call it a barrier, but a big consideration for some of the changes that we will look at in other parts of the chapter. This includes electrical power capacity, just getting the right amount of capacity for electrification, making sure there's sufficient transmission, making sure that there are sufficient substations. When we think about transitioning both feedstocks and maybe even, operational fuels to hydrogen, there's clearly a need for a robust hydrogen infrastructure to be in place for many industries. There's a need for carbon captured CO2 compression, transport, and storage, whether we're looking at sequestration or utilization. And there's also an opportunity, we think, for industrial companies to work together to help secure and maybe utilize new energy supplies or advocate for those energy supplies. All of those topics would fall under the cross-cutting need for new infrastructure to support industrial transitions. Number 9, alphabetically, is non-CO2 greenhouse gas emissions. So when we think about decarbonization of industry, we typically think about combustion emissions and, of course, process emissions from key industries like cement and iron and steel. Sometimes these are non-CO2 greenhouse gas emissions, particularly, SF6 and other chemicals used in semiconductor manufacturing, but also when it comes to refrigerants for process cooling or cold storage in the food and beverage industry. We also want to address potentially the shift to natural gas for feedstocks and fuels, and what that might mean for fugitive methane emissions and the importance for addressing fugitive methane upstream of the industrial sector to ensure that any increased use of natural gas isn't contributing to upstream fugitive emissions that come with a much higher global warming potential than on-site CO2 combustion. 10th topic, renewable heat, fuels, and feedstocks. This is a broad topic, but here we want to address opportunities for solar thermal as an energy source. There have been studies showing that solar thermal can provide a lot of low and medium temperature process heating demand across many industrial subsectors. This may include the use of thermal storage. Geothermal is an old technology, but one that's getting another look for using as a direct source of steam or even maybe on-site power generation. Use of ambient waste heat, geothermal heat pumps, and of course, bioenergy. This could come in solid, liquid, gaseous forms, could be used for on-site energy or as a lower carbon feedstock. So renewable heat, fuels, and feedstocks will be a major theme. Self-generation is a technology that is used quite heavily in US industry today. Many large industrial plants currently utilize combined heat and power, and also they're using CHP because they have on-site byproduct fuels. So if we transition to more electrification or switching fuels to greener sources, CHP could be an opportunity space, but it also might be a barrier if plants are using on-site fuels or have already invested heavily in, for example, natural gas or other fuels, CHP. Those might be more difficult to transition without a lot of research and assistance support. And nuclear small modular reactors is also falling under self-generation. We also want to consider supply chain resilience. So in transitions, would there be the necessary supply chain infrastructure in the US to support the transition? One example could be, let's say switching to more, artificial intelligence and machine learning, making sure that we have the right computational technologies to support those transitions. Also, any changes in materials or recycling infrastructure that's needed to support an industrial change. And then lastly, water is a critically important issue in most industrial subsectors. Sufficient supply, avoiding water stress, making sure there's the right quality of water, making sure that water can be treated to the appropriate levels, and the energy-water nexus is another cost-cutting topic that will be important for many industrial subsectors in the United States. So some areas may get more substantial attention than others, but we feel that it's going to be important to address all of these, and we will see and any participants in the call about this list. Our next steps, just moving forward, are going to be to use this meeting, of course, to identify areas of potential overlap and synergies, and then to take that as a subcommittee, refine and finalize our list of cross-cutting opportunity topics and subtopics, including how we'll interface with the other subcommittees. We'll assign leads for each topic. We haven't done that yet because we want to make sure we're focusing on the right areas. And then we also want to make sure that when we present our material, we have a really effective chapter structure and approach. So we're thinking about prioritizing some of the cross-cutting opportunities in terms of key benefits that could be realized. We want to make sure we're distinguishing between opportunities that are more demand side, so materials efficiency, recycling, remanufacturing, demand reduction, versus supply side, more hydrogen, more biomass, and so forth. We also want to categorize the opportunity space in terms of what opportunities could be seized immediately. What are the more midterm? What are the more long-term opportunities that are going to require much more R&D support? Quantifying the potential savings associated with each topic. In terms of savings, what does that mean? Cost savings, operational savings, CapEx savings, and so forth. We're working through that. And we also want to make sure that this structure aligns with the overall report messaging, just given the importance of cross-cutting opportunities. Lastly, I apologize that this is a bit of a dense slide, but we have put together a pretty detailed project plan for our chapter or section. We're in the early stages where we've done a lot of ideation, which I presented to you today. So we're really at the stage where we're still coordinating and finalizing our scope, which will, take us through what we think will be maybe the middle or end of August after this important meeting. And then we're going to get down to work conducting research, reaching out to experts, coordinating with other ITIC members to draft the first draft and discuss. And we know that just given the cross-cutting nature of the material in our chapter, there's going to be quite a bit of time for revision, reviews, and iterations until we reach the secretary review, which will be next fall, and finalizing the chapter for submission to Congress around next Thanksgiving or so. So with that, I'd like to conclude the presentation and turn it over to the participants and the chairs here for questions.
Any comments or questions for Eric?
Yeah, I just have one question. This is Sunday. Eric, on that digitalization, you are distinguishing between artificial intelligence and machine learning. Can you clarify that, please?
Sure. We wanted to make sure we were using terms that would resonate with the different, stakeholders out there. But, I think what you're saying is they're somewhat similar, right? So we think, machine learning, in general, machine learning has been a bit more traditional. You train models to based on data sets to perform a very specific function. Maybe it's materials discovery. Maybe it's energy optimization within an industrial plant. We also want to make sure that we're not losing sight of how artificial intelligence writ large could be an opportunity for the industrial sector. This could be through thinking about ways of redesigning products or thinking about new process pathways that might be more generative in nature. But I think a challenge for us is going to be making sure we crisply define what we mean by AI and machine learning and how they both could apply to the industrial sector.
Okay.
Yeah. Did that make sense, Sunday? It's a really good question.
Yeah, it does. It does. Most people indicate that AI is actually part of machine learning. That is the premise for my question.
We'll be sure that we're using the right terminology to speak to the widest audience when we refine our scope.
Sure. Thank you, Eric.
Other questions for Eric, or maybe comments on, which items should be prioritized? And I see Joe just put his hand up. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, it's a really great list, Eric. So congratulations on your team. Very thorough there. I guess the one thing that looked missing to me was hydrogen. You had electrification as a vector. And so usually hydrogen is included with that as another vector. And then maybe not so much for industry, but sometimes the molecular hydrocarbon fuels, the synthetic fuels, or the biofuels may have still some needs for that energy density some places in industry, but especially hydrogen, as a vector to go with electricity or electrification. I know you included it under infrastructure, but I think there's a lot of technology development in terms of how hydrogen implements into these different industries beyond just the supply of it.
Thanks, Joe. That's a really good point. And I think it's worthy potentially, or the subcommittee will discuss it, of elevating perhaps to its own section. I think our initial thinking was the sort of prevailing uses of hydrogen would be as a feedstock, clearly in ammonia manufacturing through green electrolysis, hydrogen DRI, as a combustion source, that could be a cross-cutting, technology area as well. So I think we should certainly consider maybe elevating it to not just talk about the need for the infrastructure, but what changes, within the plant would be necessary to utilize hydrogen for what purposes, combustion, feedstock reduction, and some of the challenges and opportunities associated there. I think it's a great suggestion.
Neil? Oh,
Sorry. This is more a sort of an observation and a question, and I'm not sure where this ends up going in terms of the committee assignment. But one of the issues that we're starting to see emerge, and this is true on hydrogen, is there is a push by some to prioritize hydrogen use to replace natural gas SMR hydrogen as the first application of hydrogen availability, assuming that we have a limited resource. And we're getting to some of that also now. Eric and I have been talking independently on a data center question about the competition that we see emerging between data centers and industrial electrification in places like Arizona and Georgia and North Carolina. And the question then becomes, and this is probably a public policy question, but how should we prioritize if it's a finite resource? So if we have carbon-free electricity or green hydrogen available, should there be a public policy discussion with respect to prioritization of that resource and application to a particular use in the economy?
Thanks, Neil. These are great points. I've been jotting in the mural board, or the mural board as well, some of these ideas, so we can make sure to follow up on it.
okay. Jeff?
Yeah, I agree with Neil. This could being very clear about our views on prioritization could be useful to folks who read the report. I agree with what you said earlier, Eric, about how using hydrogen for chemical feedstocks and for direct reduction of iron for primary steelmaking both make a lot of sense as priority areas, because you're using not just hydrogen as an energy source, but you're also relying on the chemical properties of hydrogen there. So it's more difficult to electrify. And those two end uses alone could consume an enormous amount of hydrogen. So even if we just committed to doing that, that might be, as much hydrogen as we could realistically supply in the near to mid terms. So before we think about recommending burning it, which has significant energy losses from the heat in the exhaust gases and the latent heat in the formed water vapor. We should consider if we're even going to have hydrogen left over after we fill the priority uses. There also may be some priority uses outside the industrial sector, like converting some of that hydrogen to liquefied sustainable aviation fuels or something. So once you hit the priority uses across all sectors, is there even going to be any left to just burn for heat?
Yeah, it's a great point, and I totally agree that using hydrogen for heat energetically is very costly, and it may not even be a major opportunity that would make sense in many industrial subsectors. I would also say this is an area that this subcommittee will have to coordinate with very closely on when it comes to the industrial sector subcommittee, which may be discussing hydrogen DRI in detail or ammonia synthesis with green hydrogen in detail. So where we land in terms of what we discuss for hydrogen, what priority we give it with respect to other cross-cutting opportunities, I think is something that remains, that's future work for the overall ITIAC to consider. But your points are well taken, Jeff, and I've jotted them down.
Okay, Joe, got your hand up?
Yeah, back to the hydrogen. One of the best ways to decarbonize that 37% is to take the off gases from refining and chemicals, reform them into hydrogen, integrate with carbon capture and storage, and then you've got decarbonized hydrogen as an energy source, and you've decarbonized your chemicals and refining complex. And so all of that fuel stock is there today. It has to integrate with the CCS. And that's actually the best way to be decarbonizing the chemical sector plus refining. So I think, that's one example as a vector. And then if you think about blue hydrogen, rather than using natural gas in the intermediate term, reforming that, storing the carbon, there's plenty of hydrogen available for heavy industry. And then there's a number of different technologies in heavy industry that you just can't decarbonize with electricity. The heat transfer and unit design is not there. So again, I think it's a very important vector, and all those sources of hydrogen are not limited. You're really only limited by your ability to do CCS.
Great.
All right, we have
Jeff.
just a couple more minutes. So anyone else from the subcommittee that wants to comment, or any last questions for Eric? Okay, Zach, I think you're gonna have were you announcing the break? Is that right?
Sure I can. I have the honor of announcing a break for everyone. So we will resume in about 14 minutes at 1:50 p.m. Eastern. Yeah, everybody stretch your legs, get some water, and we'll see you in a little bit. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
All right, welcome back, everybody. It's 1:50. As long as Jeff and Sasha are here, I would suggest we move on since they're our next presenters.
Oh, no, Anna is next.
Oh, is that it? Yes, you're right. Sorry.
We don't want to leave her out. Okay, so I think we can, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if Anna was here.
Yeah.
Yep.
I saw her. Okay, so we'll go ahead and turn it over to Anna to talk about the Workforce and Social Considerations Subcommittee.
Great. Thank you so much, Sharon. And yes, I am here back from the break. So we have this is I think the smallest of the subcommittees. The Workforce and Social Consideration Subcommittee. Our members are myself, Sue, Comas, Abigail, and Sridhar. And we met earlier this summer and then did some work virtually in Box to gather our inputs and our report out for this committee meeting. To give just a broad picture, I think our success as a subcommittee that we talked about is really incorporating these issues into the report and the thinking on these on how we actually increase technological and economic competitiveness of industry in the US and achieve those emissions reductions. So basically making sure that we incorporate this thinking into the mission of the IDIAC committee as a whole. And you can go to the next slide or scroll down. Yes, thank you. So we had some discussions on our scope. Largely the discussions around scope that we talked about are focused on workforce. So workforce training, and these are some of the questions that we have talked about. We will certainly have overlap with the barriers or mitigation or however you all decide to rename your subcommittee on workforce training. We're also talking about thinking about how community colleges and other training providers have kept up with needs and what changes are needed to train the non-traditional manufacturing workforce as we look at technology development and deployment. Second item was workforce availability and demographics. Also sounds like we may have some overlap with the barriers subcommittee. Technology deployment impacts on the workforce, what it means in a particular workforce or for a particular industry, and how that might be considered in development and deployment of technology. Occupational safety and health considerations, how those are being considered, community and stakeholder engagement, and we have particularly flagged looking into the work that DOE has been doing on requiring community benefit plans in the funding opportunities and how that's playing out. And then the last thing we discussed is the role of the labs, the national labs in these issues. And we can go to the next slide. So we had a few things that we just put a pin in for discussion hopefully in this meeting or in future meetings with the full committee. One is just better understanding some of the overlap between the subcommittees, particularly for us in the barriers subcommittee and the recommendations subcommittee. As we are looking at workforce issues, we think that there are probably many recommendations to make to DOE as we look at how DOE handles or doesn't handle these issues, or how they talk to technology developers or funding recipients, or various other key players here. So I think understanding some of those overlaps will be very helpful. We also were hoping to get a better sense of the structure of the report in this meeting. And Sharon, you sent an email a couple days ago saying that we would that subcommittee is not meeting until after the meeting. But I do think for our subcommittee, we have a big question on whether these workforce and social considerations are kind of should be a standalone section, or if we should be working with other subcommittees or some other configuration to incorporate some of this in throughout the report.
Yeah,
So
I do think that's a really good question. And yeah, I thought it was going to be more helpful for us to really develop that outline after hearing more about what the subcommittees are doing. But I think you raised a good question about, I mean, we could integrate it into certain sections as opposed to a standalone section. So we'll be.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
It's a good question for discussion. I mean, I can just, since I have the proverbial microphone here, I think there's probably some combination that would be worth considering. So I think our committee wants to understand that, our subcommittee wants to understand that a little bit better before we dive into drafting or anything like that. I do think our next steps as a subcommittee are going to be really doing a little bit more fact finding in this third quarter of the year, talking to some of the offices at DOE on these issues, on how they consider them, what they're seeing, etc. And then we hope to be doing our writing and finish that up in the fourth quarter and of course be contributing to the full report. Our proposed timeline was much less detailed than some of the other subcommittees, so this is our general thinking. And I believe those were all of our slides. So before we open it up, I'll just ask if anyone else on the subcommittee, Sue, Komas, Abigail, or Sridhar, have anything to add that I may have missed from our conversation. I guess not. Great. Well, Sharon, that's our presentation. So, I can't see hands, but maybe you can see hands if there's anything for discussion.
Yeah. So yeah, we have our first question from Neil. Neil, did you hear?
Sorry.
Okay, that's okay.
I'm still on break, so I was being a good participant and turning off my camera and mic. So I got really a question, which may be a Zach question, and then I wanted to pick up on sort of your question and vis-a-vis workforce. And I know where the two committees where I have been involved and we talk about workforce, we're viewing them as one of them being cross-cutting and one being barriers. I think this is sort of one of those pervasive issues that sort of goes throughout the entire activities of IDIAC. And because of that, I think keeping workforce as a sort of a singular focus in one place probably makes sense, because I think the solutions will be somewhat similar across all of the other issues where this comes up. So I would argue that workforce is not something that we can sort of disperse out, because this is, the words ever used is, this is an existential issue that we're not going to be able to meet our goals if we don't address. The second question, which is more a sort of maybe a Zach or DOE question, community benefit plans have emerged as a a big topic issue within DOE, and not just within IEDO, but really across DOE broadly, involving multiple offices. And I guess the question is, should community benefit plans and sort of how they are being implemented and their mission be considered within the scope of IDIAC or not? And I don't know if, this is probably not a question Zach was expecting, so I'm not sure that he has an answer.
I can give my initial feeling on this, which is that I think it certainly could be. The committee is asked to advise on barriers to adoption of emission reduction technologies, and to the extent that, especially from the workforce perspective, right? Community benefits plans are one of the ways that DOE is trying to develop the workforce for these technologies through our RD&D projects. So I think it's relevant there. And they're also how we're trying to understand some of the broader impacts of these projects on communities, and to integrate industrial communities into the decision-making processes for adopting new technologies, all those kinds of things. So I mean, in my mind, it certainly is something that the committee could comment on.
Other comments or questions for Anna?
Or are there reactions by Anna to what I said?
Fair.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have much to react to, much of a reaction to what you said, Neil. I mean, I think we're happy to handle the report however the committee as a whole thinks makes the most sense. And then as far as community benefit plans, our discussion was brief because we were all in agreement that these are a tool that DOE is using that we think should be we should be looking at, considering, and potentially, if we have any, including something in the recommendations section of the report about those and their utility in furthering decarbonization technology and competitiveness. So
I mean, I guess to sort of Zach's comment, maybe we don't need to dance around it. Maybe we should talk about CPBs as an explicit topic that we want to address in our report.
well, I mean, I do think our subcommittee needs to talk. That was the primary item that we had under kind of the not just worker specific concerns. So I do think we need to go back and make sure that there's nothing else that we're missing. But as of now, that is a primary the primary piece for us to include and look at in that section of the report.
Okay, let's move to Jeff.
Thanks. So sometimes in discussions about the workforce angle of a transition to clean and competitive industry, that like competitiveness piece comes up, and people ask, well, what about, imported products and such? And there are policy solutions like, a carbon border adjustment could be used to help prevent domestically made products from being undercut by really cheap, dirty products from abroad. is this something, this sort of, so there's the community workforce, retraining, et cetera, but then on the competitiveness side, is this something we see within the scope of this committee, this chapter, and we might recommend things like a carbon border adjustment to protect domestic workers, or is that belong in some other section?
So we did not discuss that in this section, and I'm trying to remember back because I'm also on the competitiveness subcommittee. I believe we may have talked about it there. You know, happy to incorporate those considerations here if the members of the committee think that that's most appropriate, but we did not cover them at this meeting.
My initial reaction is it probably fits better with the economic competitiveness, but I don't know how others feel. Comus. We're not hearing you. Yeah, at least I'm still not hearing you.
I'm not hearing him either.
Okay, well, if you want to call in, or I don't know, I think your gesture said to move on, but if you want to speak again, just raise your hand again. Okay. Okay, well, sorry for technical difficulties. Okay, did anyone else have a comment or question on this? All right, thank you, Anna, and thank you to your team. Okay, I think with that, we can move on to the DOE current work and gaps. And Jeff, I think if I remember right, I know you and Sasha co-lead it, but I think you were going to present. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'll present, but Sasha or others can feel free to, jump in. But I'm happy to go through the slides.
Thank you.
And they'll be, so thanks for gathering here, and I'll quickly give an update on our subcommittee's work and progress, the assessment of DOE's current work and gaps. And I've listed the members here on the first slide. Me, Sasha, co-chairs, Abigail, Kathy, Comas, Eric, Sridhar, and Sue. Next slide. So just briefly, the agenda, what does success look like? Proposed outline, which I'll walk through in a little bit of detail, project plan with milestones and additional information needs. Next slide. So this is what we think belongs in this chapter. First, a comprehensive overview of what are DOE's existing activities and programs that pertain to accelerating this transition to clean and competitive US industry. So this factual part, and then this set of useful and actionable recommendations specifically for DOE. We originally thought about whether we should have recommendations for a broader array of actors, but we're currently focusing on DOE to help optimize their programs, their technology choices, seize new opportunities, overcome barriers, serve as a coordinator across different organizations, and use other policy tools or advise other agencies. If DOE wants to submit comments to FERC or something about the electricity system. So that's what we see this chapter being about. Next slide. So this is a high-level overview of the outline. I'll walk through it a little bit more, but also note that there is a slightly more detailed version of the outline in Word in the shared box folder that I linked to before. So basically, there's two sections here. A small section one is meant to be much smaller than section two. Section 1 is meant to be this purely factual overview. What is DOE's current structure? What are they doing today for industrial decarbonization and clean and competitive industry? So it shouldn't be it's not a matter of opinion or a choice of what we're recommending. It's just a factual layout so that we can situate the reader about what we're about to assess and analyze. A preliminary version of some of this work is done here. I'll post it again in the chat. That document, DOE Industrial Programs Overview VO3, has an initial take on this with funding levels and so on, and just the tables. It's not written text, so early stage stuff that'll be refined later. And then section 2 is recommendations for DOE with 7 subsections, which I'm about to go through. And of course, this is tentative, and we can talk right now about whether we should, reconfigure these. Next slide. So section 1, as I mentioned, is meant to be strictly factual. Since we're going to assess what the DOE programs, the reader first needs to know what they are. And DOE is large and complicated, as you can see in this diagram. So this is super high level. We've just highlighted some of the offices and sub-offices that have programs specific to the industrial sector. This doesn't mean these are the only offices that do anything that relates in any way to industry. For instance, someone brought up that the Office of Electricity is also important for overcoming some barriers, and maybe we could highlight them too. But the way that the current highlights were chosen is where they have industry-specific projects. And please do check out the 12-page document at the link I posted in the chat, where we walk through what those programs are and the funding levels and so on. Next slide, please. So section 2 is meant to be the larger and more important section of the 2 sections in this chapter, with 7 subsections in it. So I'll just go through those 7 quickly here. And as I said, this is open for discussion. So 1 is to review each office and its important industry-related programs identified in section 1. So such and such an office, what technologies should they be focusing on? Do they have enough funding to achieve their needs? What are any other considerations that are specific to that one program? We'll have to make sure this isn't super overlapping with other things we might recommend later or in other chapters. So we'll have to work out how that non-overlappingness issue. Number 2 was ways to advance solutions identified by our committee. This would be from other chapters, say ways, for example, ways we could facilitate the adoption of technologies, and how DOE can specifically provide better data and modeling tools about industrial energy use to track or estimate progress. This is stuff like, could DOE run the manufacturing energy consumption survey more often than once every 4 years and provide more detailed breakouts of the end uses and fuels? Or could DOE provide better computer modeling tools, which pertains to some of the items we discussed earlier in the meeting in other chapters? Next slide. Third subsection idea was how to overcome the barriers. And these barriers here were just our initial thoughts because we hadn't seen the barriers identified by the Barriers Committee. So I expect we would change these to harmonize them with the Barriers Committee's barriers, and need to figure out if we're going to list the solutions here or if they should be listed in the barriers chapter. But in one place or another, we should list solutions to help overcome these barriers. And then coordinating action and influence across DOE, research institutions, industry, commercial, et cetera, to overcome the barriers. For fourth subsection, whether there's anything we should do within DOE to address structure gaps and redundancies. So you saw the scattering of offices all across DOE doing industrial work. We wanted to see if there were any gaps that are not currently being addressed by any of those offices or programs, and we could suggest the creation of a program within some office, say, if there's a gap. And if we identify duplication, so it was pointed out that sometimes it is useful to have two different teams working on the same problem with two different approaches. But if it's not, we could highlight, in a given instance, we could highlight that there's a duplication going on. Next slide. The fifth subsection was about coordination related recommendations, how DOE can be a coordinator. For example, DOE could convene multiple agencies across the government and other stakeholders, industry, state and local governments, academia, as well as research partnerships. So public-private research partnerships with national labs, and then that gives DOE a role in handling the IP that comes out of those partnerships. One thing that was pointed out is that industrial transition to clean industry has to happen globally. So there could be ways to make sure the IP gets licensed in low and middle income countries on fair and reasonable terms, which also promotes US technological leadership globally. The sixth subsection was things pertaining to standards. So the first point is that there are a number of organizations that maintain codes and standards. The International Standardization Organization, ISO, the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, ASME, and others. I've listed a few more there. So should DOE meet with these agencies, ensure that codes and standards are developed for the technologies and processes that are important to industrial decarbonization, and prevent any sort of fragmentation that might happen with the lack of standards? And the second bullet is that DOE themselves can set certain types of standards like test procedures and minimum energy performance standards for industrial equipment. There is some amount of legislative authority granted in the statute referenced on the slide there, but there's also political considerations in when or whether to make use of the authority. So it's a small point, but perhaps worth mentioning somewhere in the report. Next slide, please. Seven is the last subsection here in the outline. This is about suggestions DOE could make for other entities like Congress, other federal agencies, state and local governments that would improve DOE's effectiveness. So, for instance, DOE makes budget requests to Congress routinely. Would there be anything we would say to DOE about how they should tweak their budget requests? DOE can submit comments in rulemakings made by other agencies, such as FERC. And then are there missing authorities DOE could use to most effectively promote clean and competitive US industry? And so on. These are just examples. There may be other ways that DOE could make suggestions to other entities. Next slide. So credit to Eric, because I'm a member of that subcommittee and I saw this chart and I thought it looked great, and I thought there's no reason to type up a different one when I could just use the same one. So I appreciate that, Eric. This is basically just an overview of timeline and drafts. It's good to have the subcommittees basically on track with each other in any case. Next slide. So this committee, perhaps more than any other, relies on the work of the other committees. Because when we're talking about what are the recommendations to overcome barriers, what are the recommendations to achieve the solutions identified, we need to know what the other committees are identifying as the barriers and the solutions. So I think maybe the biggest challenge our committee has faced is that when all the committees are synced up, like we haven't had access before today, basically, to the complete set of ideas that the other subcommittees have had. So we want to coordinate with you all to make sure that when what we're talking about matches what you're saying and that we're not repeating what you're saying. So So that's something we can chat about more at this meeting and after. And as you develop your drafts, or even already as you have your main bulleted recommendations, just make sure they're shared with us or send them to the IDIAC email so they get added to the box folder that we can all access, because we will make use of those in our subcommittee. I think that's the last slide. Can you hit next slide? Yeah, so that's it for the presentation, and looking forward to discussion and questions.
All right, we'll open it up for comments or questions. I do particularly like the DOE slide you developed, because it's a very large organization and hard to understand, and it's nice to see that breakout.
Thanks. Yeah, and there are more sub offices, like we have at the bottom, IEDO, AMMTO. Those are all, we only listed those because those are the ones we boxed in red. The diagram would be even more complicated if we included all the sub offices that are not in industry related.
Yeah. Other comments, questions? Okay, any other comments maybe from the subcommittee members? Anything you want to add to what Jeff shared? Okay, well, I'll just go ahead and say one question I had, and I just went ahead and put it on the Miro board, but you mentioned overlap within DOE, and I don't know if you were including the national labs in that, but I personally feel like there is overlap between the national labs. You look like you're nodding. Go ahead.
I was nodding because national labs are something we wanted to look at, and Sridhar actually did a first little pass on looking at what they're doing that might be industry related. In the 12-page document on Box for all of you, and that's mentioned in this slide, we didn't include a table of national labs and their industry programs yet, simply because we didn't get to it, and we spent a long time carefully researching and getting the funding levels for all the things listed already. But I think looking at the national labs and adding them to section 1 is something I wanted to do. And then once that's done, it would be easier to assess duplication. I don't have a pre-existing opinion on the level of duplication amongst national labs.
Yeah, and it may be in the nuance. For example, I know Idaho National Lab and Oak Ridge National Lab both work on nuclear, but there may be some distinction between what kind of nuclear work they're doing that I'm just not aware of. So, don't take that as something you have to go investigate, but it is something I've wondered about before. So I'll leave it to your subcommittee to decide whether that's something you want to delve into.
I see Sue comments that she points out that there are synergies rather than duplications. So I'll be happy to work with you, Sue, on getting this into section 1 and making sure we properly reflect the good work the national labs are doing.
Yeah, and maybe that's something that just can be explained better. So thank you, Sue, for chiming in there. Okay, other questions, comments? All right. So we'll just keep moving in the agenda then. Thank you for that report. So the next, go ahead, sorry.
Before we move on, maybe I suspect that Comas may be still having audio issues. Is that true, Comas?
Zach, I think we got it sorted out. He joined by phone. So Kamas, you have to hit sometimes *6 in order to unmute your phone.
Yeah, if Comas can give the comments himself, then I welcome it. But otherwise, he just put a comment in the chat on the previous presentation, the Workforce and Social Consideration Subcommittee, and I was going to read that out.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, we can. Hear you. So
Okay, great. Thank you all. And thanks, Simone. Big help. Yeah, basically I was saying, yeah, I'm working with Anna on the workforce and social considerations. And I was saying my natural bent is, in fact, to think more of the workforce opportunities. But I'm glad it was kind of, even in this call, kind of brought back up about social considerations. And the quick comment that I put in the chat, but thanks, Zach, because I wanted to make sure everybody we had a chance to see what I was saying with that, is that, you know, actually a lot of the emphasis is, in fact, on items related to CBPs, because the communities, of course, we want them to benefit as far as where these sites are, as far as workforce opportunities. But there's also, quite candidly, a lot of caution, outright concern that sometimes comes up with these communities that may already feel like they've kind of been slighted in certain ways in how they were kind of things, manufacturing sites and practices were kind of prescribed and imposed on in their neighborhoods, right? And so now when they hear about things like, say, extensive use of hydrogen as this decarbonized fuel alternative, you know, there's concern about that. So my ultimate point is that, yeah, community engagement and ultimately their buy-in, it is in fact pivotal. And so again, just for me, although my natural primary attention tends to be on workforce opportunities, the other social considerations like community buy-in, where these manufacturers are located, is very paramount.
Thank you. Good comment. All right. Anything else before we move on? All right. So I don't believe Akshay has been able to join us today to talk about the Economic Competitiveness Subcommittee. Zach, can you just confirm, did we get anything from him? I don't believe we have.
That's correct.
Okay. So I believe Anna, you mentioned briefly that there had been a committee meeting. So I don't know if anyone from that subcommittee wants to comment on this, or we may just not have a report from them today.
Sharon, we had one committee meeting or one subcommittee meeting. It was the first subcommittee meeting, and it was, I think, prior to actually defining the goals for that meeting, for those meetings. So we probably need to reconvene to have a fuller report.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, not to put you on the spot. I just thought I'd see if you had anything.
It was a very
add.
early one. It was a long time ago.
Okay, so hopefully we'll get that subcommittee going again soon. Okay, that does take us to the break ahead of schedule. So Zach, let me ask you if you want to go ahead and take a break, or whether you think we should keep going a little longer.
Yeah, I would put that back to the committee, maybe. In this schedule as it exists now, we have one break. But there are still 2.5 hours left in the meeting. So I would suggest maybe that we go on to some of the general discussion and do that for a little while until, say, 3:20, as on the original schedule. And then we can take a 10 or 15-minute break and reconvene at that point.
Okay, that sounds fun to me. So, yeah. So these were the specific things that we thought we might want to talk about. And let me get my mural board up. Okay. So I do see people have put in comments for the subcommittees. So I encourage each of the subcommittees to read those. And I'm having a little trouble finding the section. So I know there's an open discussion section. Is there also just a section for these other items that I'm missing, like gaps, for example?
So we just have the open discussion to put everything in, and then we can sort them into the gaps and overlaps based on feedback.
Okay, so we don't have anything currently in that section. So let me just open it up to, let's talk about any gaps that we saw. And so that could be within a particular subcommittee, or that could be for the overall work here. You know, does anyone think there's something that has not been covered in our discussion that should be covered in our final report? Betsy.
At the risk of sounding really weird here, and I usually do, so I apologize, but it's been bothering me that there is a sector that I don't think I would really consider industrial or manufacturing. By the way, this is defined, it's not the scope of this effort, but I think it has a potential to become an issue, and I don't know where it fits. It could be agriculture. I guess it is agriculture, but in our program, I always get saddled with this because there is no place that it fits. So I asked the question, and we can just say, no, it's not our problem. But I think agriculturally grown crops that are grown indoors could become more of a problem long-term. So to me, it's like it is an industry, it is growing. And some of these applications, I've been told by a utility, are quite large with the electricity draw. Neil, you want to respond to that?
I would concur, and I recently had IEDO actually reach out to me because we've been involved in some work in the which are usually referred to as CEA, or Controlled Environment Agriculture. And as you note, I mean, historically, this was originally emerged as an issue in states that legalize cannabis production.
Yes.
But as we've seen in many of those states, the industry has proliferated, and in some ways, cannabis has become somewhat of I wouldn't call it secondary, but certainly part of a constellation of products that are being focused on. These include vertical agriculture, various cropping, urban.
Yes.
High intensity applications. And you are absolutely correct. It's somewhat similar to sort of the data center issue. It doesn't fit anywhere.
That's why I keep getting calls to take on the farms, but we're not going to do that because of the legal issues. But what concerns me more, Neil, is I think with the type of year we're seeing this year, and the fact that crops are wilting in the fields, that food supply is going to be severely disrupted as we move forward in the future if this continues, I think we need to be anticipating what this means and what kind of energy needs, which will only multiply as we go forward, and some sort of anticipatory assistance, research, whatever, would be timely.
Yeah, and I would note that there is work being done has been initiated within OSED. I mean, and OSED within IEDO. I don't know how much, if Zach is familiar or others are familiar with it, but my sense is that's fairly preliminary. There's also quite a bit of work coming out of the USDA.
So maybe there's some type of recommendation we would want to make.
Yeah.
Where it fits, how it fits. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, some goes back to the industry focus and the question of what do we want to do with food? When several of my colleagues and I were leading the chapter on food and beverage in the industrial decarbonization roadmap. One of the challenges that we encountered, which Joe Cresco with IEDO is very familiar with, is this whole question of where does agriculture stop and where does food and beverage begin? And it's somewhat of an arbitrary definition, and we've actually run into problems with that historically, in that the census or the economic census does not cover agriculture because it's covered under the ag census, and ag census does not include
energy and all the needs you need.
Well, it includes energy, but it doesn't include the manufacturing sector. And what happens is a facility like one of these, I guess you would call them controlled environment agricultural and facilities, depending upon some, no offense, some analyst at the Census Bureau, they decide, oh, that's agriculture, or oh, that's a food and beverage facility, and it's two different NAICS codes. And what happens is it kind of stuff, facilities bounce back and forth in the censuses. But I do think you're absolutely correct, because many of these new facilities that you're describing are very much looking more like a manufacturing facility than
the amount of energy. One utility told me they had in the Midwest, a 14 greenhouse setup that was being permitted, and 14 greenhouses, and it rivaled a nearby steel plant. I assume it was an EAF, but anyway, the point is that's what they said. And
no, these are
built
certainly,
out,
and some of these, and it's the reason I mentioned the similarity to the data centers is a lot of this is HVAC load.
Yes. And if crops can't grow in the heat, we're going to have problems. So there's going to be other things that are going to have to come in that are only going to dwarf what we've got now. So that's why I raised this.
Yeah, I think that was a really good question, Betsy. Thank you for bringing that up. It's something I hadn't thought about at all.
I'm always being asked to deal with the pot running. I'm a federal program here. Anyway, I think that real food issues are going to become very big.
Yeah, the other point, and there's some work going on at both NREL and at Oak Ridge on these topics. And they are getting some USDA funding in addition to DOE funding on them. But what's actually transpiring, is, these are, and that barrier, you have that food beverage, that barrier, a lot of the best measures, and I'll give you a specific example, J.R. Simplot or PepsiCo figured out years ago that there was more carbon footprint in J.R. Simplot's potato
because of fertilizer.
Because of fertilizer than there was in the trucks hauling from Simplot to PepsiCo. So, the appropriate measure is to start a sustainable, minimum till agriculture program, which is what PepsiCo did.
Well, I think we just need to look at what we're experiencing this summer and last summer, and it doesn't seem to be abating yet. So we need to think these things through, because people will start taking actions. If we're ahead of it and can suggest ideas and getting the right people engaged, we may be able to help a bit.
Can I ask Subodh, since to me that probably falls in industrial subsectors, could I ask you to add that to your list for your consideration?
Okay, I'll do that. And all right, thanks. And that will be in the minutes. So I can, when I get the minutes, I'll comb through it and add it on.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, good point, Betsy. Other thoughts? Things that we haven't covered that we should cover?
See the quote in there from Joe Cresco in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
I added it to the mural board.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Good. Okay. Thank you. All right.
Sharon,
yes.
I have a comment. It's not so much about a gap in coverage of the report. It's maybe a question or a gap about the process for our committee. I feel like in the course of this conversation, we've identified a number of places where one subcommittee's work will depend on another's, or there's known areas of overlap. And I'm wondering if we can have some discussion now or a little bit later about just like a process for creating touch points around those, because I think that's what we need in order to start to really stitch together what a report would actually look like. And I don't think it's too early to start to think about that flow.
Yeah, overlaps was next on the list, so we're not hearing a lot of gaps. We'll go ahead and move to that. But if people do have other gaps, feel free to raise your hand or put them in the chat, the Miro board. So let's go ahead and talk about overlaps. And let me first start with what I've been thinking about the committee that's going to work on the outline. So, that was my decision. I elected to hold that committee's work until we had this meeting, because if you remember, at the end of the March meeting, we really had a fairly good outline that we left with that formed the subcommittees. But I think now, with the additional detail from the subcommittees, now it's time for this group to meet and start focusing on that. But I just want to say that as background. It's not in any way disagreeing with what Anna has said. I think it's good to have ideas for how we can either coordinate things or have touch points. And I mean, just to throw out one idea would be for the subcommittee leaders to have a more frequent meeting so that we talk about these things. We could assign, a pair of people, like, for example, if we see some overlap between, one that comes to mind is barriers and cross-cutting technologies. We could assign a pair of people to work on issues there. So I'm just throwing out some ideas, but looking for feedback on how to resolve this, because my take is there's probably a lot more potential for overlap in what we've talked about than gaps in what we've talked about. So interested in thoughts on how to do this most efficient and best way.
Hi, Sharon, this is Kathy. I believe most committees have at least one or two members who are on other committees. Would it be appropriate to ask those overlap members to essentially execute what you requested?
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. And that's something Caroline could help us with to make sure we know, who's on multiple committees. I will say, prior to this meeting, one thing I asked Caroline to do is to look at that, the people who volunteered to be on the outline subcommittee, to make sure we had representation from all committees, and we did all subcommittees, and we do have that representation. But yeah, I think what you're saying is a great idea, because that would be no extra meetings for people beyond what they have. So I do like that idea. Other thoughts on how to accomplish this?
I guess a question, Sharon, and this may be a Zach question, is there a possibility for subcommittees for two subcommittees to do a joint meeting in order to coordinate on a topic?
So generally that is not going to be possible.
Okay,
essentially,
then ignore what I said.
If more than half of the committee meets together, then that's a full committee meeting that needs to be open to the public and noticed and all that. So, I mean, if there is a strong interest in having that type of meeting, we absolutely can go through that process. But it's just something to be aware of, that we need more, advance notice, and it'll be open to the public and all of that.
Sharon, could you remind us who is on the subcommittee charged with doing the report outline?
Caroline, do you have that handy? I do have it in the email that you sent me, if nothing else.
Yes, I can pull that up.
Thank you.
And I can read through it right now because I already have the spreadsheet open. So
okay.
Sharon is the lead for that subcommittee. And then other people who are members are Abigail, Sridhar, Neil, Eric, Jeff, and Akshay.
Oh, yes, thank you. This is exactly what I was looking for that Caroline had sent to me that shows, you know, who we have from each subcommittee on the, she's called it the report subcommittee. I've been thinking of it as the outline subcommittee, but whatever. So I guess you all can look at that, and we do have a limit on the number of people unless we want to make it a public meeting, which I don't think we need to in this case. So, you know, do we feel like we have the right people on this? Are there others that should be included that are not?
One of the things that came up in regard to, I think it relates to this, is several people, I believe, commented on the data sources that we have to rely on for these sectors. So EIA, census, and so forth. This is a big problem. It's been a problem. A lot of us have tried to, I know Neil's probably tried to work through it. And if it's really common across, maybe it needs to be, can we create, so Zach, did you say we cannot create another subcommittee, or could we create just a data subcommittee that would deal with?
There's no limitation on the number of
subcommittees. Okay. I mean, one way, if there's something like that is such a problem, it really is, you're not going to be able to judge much, because the data, if anything, you get less as time goes on due to budgets. And it's not just census that you have to argue with. The IRS is the origination of the census data. So everything you do with census goes through IRS. So it gets worse. There's a lot of attorneys involved in data. So I don't know. It's just a suggestion.
Looks like Neil may have a thought on that.
As Betsy knows well, you know, I've been doing those deep dives for many, many years. I think one of our challenges, and it's being exacerbated right now by the rapid emergence of new industries, is that the Department of Census, or the U.S. Census Bureau, basically manages the NAICS codes, which is how we categorize, which is by products. And we have things like battery manufacturing ending up in electrical equipment. And the battery manufacturing we're seeing today looks nothing like the battery manufacturing that we saw 10 years ago. And it probably needs to be someplace else. It's an energy intensive industry, but that's not how it's categorized. And because census collects all the EIA data on behalf of the Department of Energy, we're constrained sort of in how you segment stuff. And DOE and EIA is currently put on pause for this year. The annual energy outlook for industry, in large part because the model has quit working, because industry doesn't look like the model is constituted, and they're trying to actually restructure industry sectors. So, you know, I think to Betsy's point, I think availability of data and transparency for outside folks could be a huge issue. It's certainly an issue that Jeff and I spend a lot, and Eric Massonet spend a lot of time kvetching over, I guess. I don't know what other word to use, but and I think many of the industry people we work with face similar challenges, that the data they need to do strategic business planning frequently doesn't exist.
And if this is a report to Congress and a report to the Secretary of DOE, who also governs EIA, then they need to be told about the seriousness of this and the impact on all of the work that we're doing, that anyone's doing at DOE.
I mean, you're convincing me it should be included. The question in my mind is, does it need to be a separate subcommittee? Or could it be part of, I mean, it seems like it might fit with the barriers subcommittee. And you mentioned several people. I don't know if any of those people are on that committee. So open to your thoughts on that. Does it need to be a separate group or could it be part of barriers?
And I'll maybe say from an administrative perspective, everything is considered subcommittee, but certainly we can think about like more of a working group or something like that that reports up to a subcommittee.
Okay. Jeff?
I'll just note that in our outline, we had a point for like DOE providing better access to data, running the the manufacturing energy consumption survey more often and breaking out more data in it. The annual energy outlook stuff that you're mentioning could also fall into that. So that's something we could coordinate between us and barriers or whatnot. But just wanted to mention it was on our radar.
I guess I'm kind of inclined, but I'm throwing out an opinion. People, please tell me if you disagree or see it differently. But rather than try to form a different subcommittee, and I hadn't thought about the DOE one, Jeff, I think that's a good comment. You know, since you already kind of have it on your radar, is it something you could just expand on what you have and perhaps pull in, you know, I'm not sure all's on that subcommittee, but Neil, Betsy, you know, whoever is appropriate to include to flesh that out. Would that be a reasonable approach?
Yeah, I would be happy to, on my end, the manufacturing energy consumption survey was just one example of the type of product that could be improved. But if Neil and Betsy and others have other thoughts, that's great. And I'd love to list very specifically all of the products and ways that DOE could be providing useful data.
And we know suggestions. I mean, I know we can invite experts to talk to us. I think there are some experts we want to bring in who are very versed in these sources, these data sources that could give you examples of things that are not getting done that would be important to this group and DOE to show some really good examples of why it's needed.
Okay, so Jeff and Sasha, are you willing to kind of take that on?
I'm certainly willing to include this material in our chapter or section of the report. I don't think I'm gonna take on coordinating external experts about it. I don't know that I have those connections, but if someone, Betsy or others, want to collect like the details of what the experts want to see data-wise and convey them to me and Sasha in like a bunch of bullets or something, then we can make sure that each recommendation makes it into the report chapter.
Okay.
Looks
Zach?
like our organizer, Zach, has a comment before.
Yeah. Keep us straight here, Zach.
I guess I'll say that probably sounds like that approach will work. The DOE subcommittee is at capacity right now, and Neil and Betsy are not on that subcommittee, so they really can't join the subcommittee. So I think it does make sense, and especially if there are going to be maybe presentations and conversations with outside people, to organize that as maybe a little bit of a working group or something that's separate and can talk about those issues for anybody who's really interested in the data issues, and then can, like Jeff just said, maybe provide that input to the DOE subcommittee to go into that chapter.
Okay.
When the report's compiled.
Okay,
yeah,
let's hear.
Not trying to make more work for anybody, definitely. We got enough. But I do think this has been something that we've known for years and have tried to do little things here and there that we have within our power, and it just never changes.
Yeah, I think it's a good call out. Neil?
So Zach, I think this is a topic that may be of a certain of the level to warrant consideration in our in-person fall meeting. And I'm wondering if we could ask, and this, Sharon, with your, obviously with your concurrence, if we could ask you to reach out to Energy Information Administration to get a briefing by EIA on industrial data and modeling. Because I think this is this could be, one of those, as I think as Jeff said, one of those recommendations that could be really an important one. Why should, let's just solve the problem of trying to dance around having too many people in a meeting and just do it as part of our fall in person.
And we should ask them to share where they would improve what they're able to do now. They have a whole long laundry list of things they'd like to do that they haven't been able to. So I think we should ask to hear those things.
Yeah, and my sense is they're more than happy to share that. And so I would think that, I know Joe Cresco has been involved in a number of conversations that with EIA that I've been involved in, and they've certainly not been shy about the challenges they confront.
So that was a question I had, but let's get to that a little bit later. But I did want to ask before we leave today, are there specific topics we want at that in-person meeting? So Zach, is that something?
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. And I think that's something we should be able to set up.
Okay.
And yeah, just to your point, I would say now and like the next round of subcommittee meetings are the time to figure out if there are topics that we should cover in the next meeting as we put together the agenda and invite speakers and all that. So
Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, so going back a little bit to make sure we've closed the loop on this, we were talking about overlaps, and we got into the discussion about how we're going to deal with the overlaps. And I think we meandered off of that. So let me bring us back to that to make sure we have resolution. So I think what I heard, and I didn't hear any disagreements, but I'm asking if there are concerns about this approach at this point, is for each subcommittee to identify who on their subcommittee has, response or dual membership in other subcommittees where there might be an overlap, and ask that person to work with them on resolving overlaps. If you do not have anybody on the subcommittee where you think there might be an overlap and need someone, then come back to me and Zach, but maybe you already have that person. So any objections with that approach? Okay, so we'll plan to do that. In addition to that, I will be calling a meeting hopefully very soon. Oh, Abigail, go ahead before I move on.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. Just a quick note that I think I may be in several subcommittees, but just to flag that I may not always be the best person to take on this role, though I will become much more available in October for what that's worth.
Yeah. Yes. And I mean, it's a good point. You need to make sure that a person agrees to take on that role. So yeah, thank you. Okay. But if you don't have a person, let me and Zach know, and we'll try to work something out. And then in addition to that, hopefully very soon, we'll have a meeting of this report outline group where we will also be looking at overlaps and just making sure people are aware of those and have some plan for working those out. Sunday, did you have something to add?
Just a question. As a new member, can I join any of the subcommittees?
Yes, we would definitely like for you to join subcommittees. So, and I don't know, Caroline, do you have a slide that shows all the subcommittees and the current membership? Because we need to be careful about, the number on each subcommittee. So, and that, I don't know, Zach, if you want to do that outside this meeting, we could. Do we want to perhaps work offline with Sunday to figure out his interest and whether there's space on those subcommittees?
Yeah, maybe it's best to handle offline.
Okay.
I'm not sure offhand if we have a slide. We have a spreadsheet where we're
Yeah.
keeping track of all this stuff.
Okay,
So.
so Cindy, we'll follow up with you on that. But you know, we definitely want you involved. So thank you for asking that question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else on overlaps? Okay.
I actually
and then,
might
go ahead.
raise something on to go back to gaps.
Okay.
I have been, let me try to share my screen. I pulled up our establishing language to look at the list of technology focus areas just to see if there was anything that seemed like it hadn't been covered yet. So let me just ship that. Here we go. Okay. So most of the technology focus areas right now, I think, are already going to be covered by the industrial sectors subcommittee and the cross-cutting technologies subcommittee. These ones here, I'm a little uncertain about. And so maybe as a first point, I'll reiterate that the committee has the authority to alter this list of focus areas. You're able to decide that there are things that should be here that aren't on the list, or that there are things on the list that shouldn't be a focus. But it is something that'll have to be explicitly kind of discussed and agreed on by the committee to change the focus areas. So this first one here, alternative materials that produce fewer emissions during production, result in fewer emissions during use. I think some of these issues were mentioned, I think, in those two subcommittees, and I know critical materials came up. But just want to explicitly mention these now. Building materials, lightweighting materials, and again, critical materials. There's also a point on, I know we talked about refining, but looking at net zero emissions fuels as well are explicitly called out. And then, sorry, I'm hearing some background noise from Subodh, maybe. If you can go on mute when you're not speaking, thanks. And then finally, on the shipping, aviation, and long distance transportation one. So we don't necessarily have to make final decisions on whether these things stay or go today, but would just ask if folks feel like these belong to either of those two technology subcommittees, or if they're something that the committee would not want to overly focus on.
Neil, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I mean, I think Zach raises a very good question, and I'm less worried about 2 and 3 because I think they may be covered under one of the technology committees. But 4 is really about something fundamentally different, which is really about supply chain issues. And I don't know that we have any committees that are focusing on supply chain, which are the, sort of the issues that they touch on there. Zach, I don't know if you wanted to react back to that.
I think that's a fair point. And I would agree that it's something that one of the non-technology focused subcommittees could take on if they wanted to look at the bigger picture, kind of scope 3 emissions associated with industrial materials. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Joe, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think that's a great topic. I'm working heavily in that area, but I mean, the technology industrial processes 1, are you saying these other numbers are included in our task description for this committee, or does that?
They could be. Uh,
bec-
yes,
because-
I think in particularly the three there, I basically, I could see that being within the scope of the chemicals industry. I mean, I've been tracking things like SAFE, for example, which is really coming out of chemicals. It's a part of that sort of nexus, if you will. I don't know how you others feel about that. The innovative building materials, Abigail touched on some of that. A lot of the cement is about alternative products. So transitioning from Portland to, say, limestone, calcine clay, or some other alternative product. You know, steel industry, SAAB is, you know, very involved in development of high performance, lightweighted materials for the automotive industry.
Yeah, because mainly when you look at the big DOE roadmap, you know, they have industry at about 30%. They have transportation at about 30%, and then usually shipping, aviation, and those are falling under that other 30% bucket, you know, in terms of sectors of the economy to decarbonize. You ultimately decarbonize that with industrial processes to make some of these synthetic fuels. And some of that we're doing today. A lot more of that we'll be doing in the future. And some of that will be retrofitting current refineries and chemical processes. It's like ammonia, you know, decarbonized ammonia is a vector to be decarbonizing number 4 there in shipping, aviation.
Absolutely.
And so just curious how that intersects. And, you know, are we looking at today's industry or those future industries we will be developing that'll be addressing sectors, you know, like transportation, which is, you know, number 4. And the zero emission liquids and gaseous fuels, some of those are used within industrial manufacturing today because electrification and hydrogen don't always work. And so those definitely come in under number 1, but just curious of the committee's comments on, because, you know, we could go way after sectors of the economy, especially on the transportation side, that's perhaps is being covered by another committee and not IDIAC, I guess would be my comment.
I think you make a good point, Joe. And I think you know, one of the questions, and this is, Zach, this may be one of those where we need to have a committee discussion and reach a decision, is when we say emissions reduction in shipping, aviation, and long distance transportation, are we talking about the role of, to Joe's point, the role of manufacturing in reducing that emissions, or should we be looking at shipping and the infrastructure of the construction of the supply chain? So things like nearshoring or clusters or things like that, which have the potential to dramatically reduce long distance transport needs simply because we co-locate to minimize transportation. You know, that's really more been, you know, OT. Well, I don't know who that is. That's really probably more like DOT than it is the sort of the, you know, technology office, the transportation technology office.
Yeah, but a lot of what's happening in that reduction is going to come through the low carbon fuels substitution, and then also the work on the drivetrains of those transportation, you know, technologies and the integration of those two. And
I mean, one of the things I was talking to some Volvo guys, And their goal right now is 15% non-battery weight reduction for electric vehicles by 2030 something, in order
Right, but
to improve the range and the efficiency of the electric vehicles.
but in shipping, you'll be switching from current diesel engines to dual fuel engines, which require technology development, and then you'll also need to be supplying the synthetic fuels, either from biofuels or CO2 capture and conversion with hydrogen. Because you can't do that with electricity. But usually when you look at the big DOE charts, that's coming up in that 30% transportation sector. And then we've got our sector, which in my mind is at 30%. They're both about 30%, for what they call industry. Although, as you point out, Neil, yeah, industry is involved in transforming to make the components of the engines, design them, and then the fuels that go in them. And how do you decarbonize by combining those two?
I would suggest, and this is something that EIA did probably 25 years ago, was they actually linked the industrial demand module in NIMS to the freight technology module, freight demand module in NIMS, rather than linking it to the light duty model in NIMS, because they said manufacturing activity drives freight.
Yeah, you've got that supply chain aspect as well. And so, but yeah, I guess that's my question is, I haven't looked out there in terms of what other committees are there decarbonizing the transportation sector. The IMO, there's a shipping industry has their forum. There's a vehicles technology offices is doing a lot of the different classes of road vehicles, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, let me try to weigh in here because, I mean, we already have a huge task, I think, in front of us with industry. So my preference would be to put some boundaries on this. And so I like something you said, Joe, that I think it's reasonable to deal with these things in terms of industry's production of them. But my preference would be to stay away from the transportation issues per se. So any objection to that kind of approach?
That would be my thought, is that there's a lot of the DOE that's already engaged in those things in yellow that's outside of our committee.
Yeah, and
then,
these,
yeah.
Sorry. Well, I was just going to say, I mean, my understanding, and Zach, please weigh in here, but this was, given to us as something we could decide to pare down. So I don't know that we have to include these specific things. So I think unless someone has strong opinions, like something's got to be in there, then, to let the subcommittees continue to work through what they think should be included. But if anybody feels really strongly, these things should be included, I think the time to speak up is now.
Well, I think it's true that the statement that EI has experience and knowledge in these focus areas. And, but yeah, that's my general question. Is 2, 3, and 4 part of our prescribed mandate as it was initially set?
Zach, I'm going to ask you to comment on that, please.
So this is part of the initial mandate that was outlined by Congress in establishing the committee. But to Sharon's point, the Congress also said that the committee can change this list of focus areas.
But is there somebody
it really
else?
is actually up to you all.
Those are huge
Well,
areas.
that's something I can look into some more. There have been advisory committees for the Vehicle Technologies Office, and I don't recall offhand if they're still active or not. But certainly, I guess I would say the industrial programs at DOE are generally not focusing on transportation sector emissions.
I see, because looking at 2, 3, and 4, that's as big as everything in one in terms of impact. And so, we hate to be remiss in terms of addressing something we're challenged to do. I mean, yeah, I'm already working in that space, and but I guess when I saw the I in industrial, I saw that as 30% of that DOE chart. And then the T is transportation in the 30%, and was thinking somebody else was doing advisory on the T, but maybe I was wrong.
Yeah. Okay. We'll let Zach look into that a bit more, but yeah, I think we have a big task in front of us without trying to veer too far away from industrial. So, okay. But thanks for the questions. It's good to kind of test these things and see how people think. All right. Okay. So I think we're ready to move on to timelines. I guess maybe a check step here. Go ahead.
This might be a good point, Sharon, for us to pause for a say 15-minute break.
That's exactly what I was going to say, that we could do that. So, all right. So tell us when to come back, Zach.
Yep. So we will take a break and resume at 3:30 p.m. Eastern in about 15 minutes. See everyone then.
Thank you.
All right, it is 3:30. Welcome back, everybody. I will hand it over to Sharon to resume the discussion.
All right, we were about ready to move into the timeline section of the discussion. I know a lot of the subcommittees did share timelines, and so from a big block, we are anticipating sending this report to Secretary Granholm. And Zach, can you help me? I think it's at the end of September. Is that correct?
That sounds correct to me. Let me pull up the timeline. Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, so really this is just an opportunity for anyone to say if they see problems with the timeline at this point. I don't think we heard any concerns about the timeline, but I do just want to give opportunity if anyone has any concerns to voice them now. Okay, it appears to me all the subcommittees were working toward that. So we will evaluate that at each of our committee meetings just to make sure we're still on track. But it looks like, you know, from a big block standpoint, we are on track at this point. So that's good news. The next thing I had on my agenda was just any general questions and comments. So let me just open the floor to see if anyone had anything else to add, and then we'll get to some final comments that I have. I'll just wait a couple of minutes, see if anyone has anything. I appreciate that this is not a shy group. We usually have people speaking up, so I like that. All right. Sorry, I've too many windows open. Let me just refer back to my agenda, make sure we're not missing anything. Okay. So, Zach, I think we don't really have a public comment period, so are we just skipping that? Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. We didn't have anybody sign up to give comments. So.
Okay. I do notice that there are some comments on the Miro board. Is there, I don't know, it's difficult for me to see those. So Zach, is that something you could look quickly and see? This may be people just documenting what has already been said, or there may be additional comments people have put there. So can I give you just a minute to do that?
Sure. And I'll also maybe open it to Selena in case she sees anything.
Yes,
popping up as she's been working on it.
Yeah, that's good.
One thing, Sharon, that might help you, there's in the bottom right, there's a zoom control, so you can like press the plus or minus to zoom in or out to make things bigger.
Thank you.
You can also open it to any committee members who have put things into the mural and feel like it is a comment worth making verbally.
And if things are deprioritized as a barrier, as a discussion point potentially.
Sorry, can you say that one more time? I think you cut off kind of at the beginning.
I'm sorry, that was
that.
In the barriers section, there is a comment in there about what to consider if the prioritization of industrial decarbonization goes away, and that as a barrier to consider.
Oh, that's an interesting one.
Thing that we have discussed today. I think though.
I guess in response to that, I would say this meeting, that was something Avi talked about, that was one of the reasons for the formation of the committee, to provide continuity across different administrations. And so, you know, it's possible the priority can change, but the intent in establishing this committee was that we would go, you know, across administrations.
That's correct. And I guess I would maybe just add, I guess, on the general point, of course, the idea is that the committee gives recommendations that are actionable by DOE. So you want to stay kind of within the scope of what DOE can do. But I think certainly, depending on the administration, DOE priorities might change. But yes, to your point, Sharon, the committee's priority is set by the statutory language, and the committee will continue on with the same focus that it started with.
So any other comments, Selena or Zach or anyone else want to raise?
Everything else in mural we've discussed. Someone did add in that the Works and Gaps Assessment Subcommittee kind of relies on the other subcommittees. So their material may go into different parts of the report, I think is what this one's trying to say.
Yeah, I think that's what Anna raised on. Is that a separate subcommittee or a separate report, a separate section in the report, or is it incorporated in some of the others? So I think that's something we're going to be looking at within the outline subcommittee.
I know she had brought that up for workforce, so I wasn't sure if this went to that.
Oh,
same.
sorry.
No, it's okay. This was on the gap side, so I wasn't sure if we're in that same bucket of do they get drafted and then sprinkled in elsewhere, but I'll leave that to you all to talk about.
Okay, Neil, do you want to talk about that or something else?
Yeah, something else.
Okay, well, before you do that, does anybody want to expand on what Selena was just talking about that she saw, I guess, in the gap section? Anna, are you raising your hand for that?
Yeah, I'll just respond and say, I'm happy to bring that back to the subcommittee if folks want.
Okay, yeah, I think feedback would be good. And I think you can probably also expect to hopefully get some additional direction from the report outline subcommittee. Abigail, were you going to talk about that or something else?
Yeah, just a brief comment on this. And like you said, maybe we'll discuss more on the outline subcommittee. But the way that I had kind of been thinking about the GAPS recommendations subcommittee, and that it is kind of some of that work will be based on the other subcommittees. I think that is true. But I guess I was seeing the format of the report as the other subcommittees and kind of preceding chapters laying out more generally the problems, barriers, opportunities for industrial decarbonization at large, and then the GAPS DOE recommendations being very specific to DOE and how DOE and the existing programs, or if there needs to be like new programs, and it's kind of the gaps within DOE and DOE structure itself to address what was identified in the other chapters. I don't know if folks were kind of thinking of it the same way or think that kind of makes sense, so that it would still live kind of as its own chapter, but it would be very much linked to the preceding chapters.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that clarification. Okay, we'll move on from that. Neil, I think you had another subject.
Yeah, this is a sort of this may be a Selena question. I don't see it on the gaps on the mirror board, but one of the things we were talking about is making sure that we capture emerging issues such as battery manufacturing and some of these industries that are fundamentally different than the industries that we've assumed we would be in the manufacturing sector in the past. Somewhat like this whole question of controlled environment agriculture. This is not agriculture. This looks more like industry. And these certainly these battery manufacturing plants, the ones we're looking at right now, are coming in as gigawatt loads, which is not a normal manufacturing plant.
Yeah. Okay, good point. And
No, I think a comment to that effect is in the industrial sectors section, but it is, yeah, it's talking about a gap also.
Yeah.
yeah, and I would hope, even for emerging industry, even if we can't talk a lot about it, to at least highlight it as something that needs more evaluation in the future. So, I'd like to at least include it in some way.
And I
All
know
right.
this is an issue that EIA is struggling with as they redo the National Energy Modeling Industrial Demand Module. So this is not this is something, a lot of these things didn't exist quite literally 2 years ago. Industry's moving faster than seems to be moving faster than it's ever moved before.
All right. Any final comments? General questions?
I will maybe make one final comment on the outlining committee. That one thing I will ask them to do explicitly is that I have these handful of slides on the legislative direction for the committee, and we'll ask them to kind of map the directives that the committee received onto the different subcommittees, just to make sure that we're going to cover all the parts of the report that have to be in there. And will help with identifying any of those gaps or identifying things that we need to explicitly discuss at the next full committee meeting as maybe something where we're adopting a different focus from what was originally laid out.
Okay, I think that's a good suggestion. All right, with that, I did have just a few things oh, Anna, go ahead.
Sorry, I just have one more question about
Sure.
the outline committee and the way both the way and the timeline for, maybe not exact timeline, but general timeline for how you plan to feed back to the other subcommittees. Just I know our subcommittee is very our follow-on work is very dependent on the work of that subcommittee. Is that something that we should just look for in box, or would there be a better
No.
way to do that?
Well, I don't think you have to go look for it. I think it's something we would communicate to everyone. So you can expect to hear from me, or possibly Zach will send it out. But yeah, we will definitely be communicating, I hope within the next, 4 to 6 weeks, let's say. And Anna, I guess I hadn't really realized people were waiting on the results of that. So I apologize for holding you up on that. All right, just a few things.
Thank you.
Thanks. Just a few things I wanted to say in closing. So I do want to thank all the subcommittee leaders and the participants. I think we've done quite a lot of work in a fairly short period of time, and I really appreciate everyone's dedication. When we had the meeting in March, I think I said at the end that I came into this subcommittee or into this committee work being excited about what we're going to do, and I left even more excited because of meeting everyone and seeing everyone's passion and interest and capability. So it's a really great group, and I thank you all for that. Just to remind everyone, we do have an in-person meeting scheduled for October 29th and 30th. That will be back in DC. We've talked a little bit about suggestions to include in that meeting. We talked about the data information. Zach's going to be looking into that. Another thing I've asked him to look into for that meeting is there was a workshop in, I believe it was May, where DOE asked for a lot of industrial input on decarbonization. And one thing I would like is for someone to come and give us a summary of the takeaways from that meeting, because we did talk about in March, we feel like we need to make sure we're representing industry, and there's a limited number of industrial people on this committee. So that's something else I have asked for. Are there other ideas, topics that people think they would like to have at that in-person meeting that we haven't already covered? All right, if you do have suggestions, please send those to the IDIAC mailbox to Zach and Caroline, and we will definitely look at those as we're planning the agenda. The last thing I had, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, if
Zach?
I can just mention, there are at least 2 other things that are on my radar as meeting requests that have come out of the subcommittees.
Okay.
So, Anna's subcommittee has discussed wanting to be briefed by the Office of Energy Justice and Equity. And Jeff's subcommittee, I know, is also interested in learning more about the DOE standard setting authorities. And so those are, I guess I would maybe put to the committee if those are things that you would like to keep to the subcommittees that are requesting them, or if those would be of broader interest.
I think, I don't know if there's an easy way to really get, a vote on that. So if there's not in this forum that we're in, I wonder if Caroline could send out a quick poll and just see the level of interest.
Yep.
And depending on that, decide whether to include that in the full committee meeting. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's a good suggestion.
Okay.
I don't think we've set up any polls here, so.
Yeah. All right. Other thoughts? All right. Any other just general comments before we close the meeting? Okay, well, I know it's not that fun to have, a 4-hour remote meeting, but I really appreciate everybody's participation. I think we had some good discussion, and it's really good to see the work that has been accomplished. So I appreciate what's been done and what I know is going to be done. And I just feel like we have an opportunity here to really raise some important issues, and I'm glad to see that we're having a lot of forward progress on making that happen. So thank you, everyone. Zach, anything else before we end?
The only thing I will mention is to reiterate what I said at the beginning, that the committee is happy to have input from the public. You can send written comments to itiac@ee.doe.gov. And if you are interested in joining the committee, or you know someone who would be a great member of the committee, we also accept nominations at that same email address. So absolutely welcome participation from folks as both public commenters and potentially as committee members. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Hope everyone has a good rest of the day, and I'm sure we'll be talking between now and October, and hope to see everyone then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.